Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. That's Brian Driscoll. And we got another fun one for you, folks. It is a Thursday. We are inching ever so close to the beginning of the season. It's like I could taste it. I could smell it. I could see the golden light at the end of the tunnel, which is game one. I mean, we're in the month, obviously, and we're only a few weeks away. So I'm getting pumped up. I'm getting excited. And today, we are actually going to talk about a couple of different topics. So the overarching topic is pass game. And so we're going to look at that in a couple of different ways. We're going to look at that from an offensive standpoint, and we're going to look at historically and what we think they're going to be and all of that. And then defensively, the pass defense. Can they be as good as they've been, etc.? And so I'm looking forward to that. And then, of course, after that, since it is Thursday, I think we got off track a little bit before, but we are doing our final Power 4 conference preview, and that will be the Big 12. And it's not a spoiler alert, but this was by far the hardest conference to project, in my opinion. And I think
the one where we probably had the most
difference
of opinion.
Oh, yeah. Big time, especially at the top. So that one's going to be fun as well. So we're pass game, offense, defense, and then Big 12 overview, and that's the show for today. So stick around because we got a lot of good stuff coming your direction. So we are going to kick it off with the offensive side of the ball and the pass game. And so what does that mean exactly? That is, what we've seen recently in the pass game, and obviously there have been various trigger men over the last few years. Not a lot of continuity at the quarterback position. And a lot of that's because of the portal or injury or what have you. But, I think this is the fourth different starting quarterback in a row, right? 4 years in a row, different starting quarterback. Fifth, if you count, I guess, the last tenure of Ian Book. And so yet another quarterback goes under center. And, we are talking about the consistency of the pass game specifically in the big moments and when it matters most. And is there a chance that that is going to change going into this year, Brian?
Needs to.
Yes, it does.
I mean, that's the big thing, right? Like, will it change? I mean, we're going to find out, right? But the fact is it needs to, Vince. And that's the big thing is, like I'm sitting here, prepping for the show and I'm going over the data and I'm crunching numbers and what it comes down to is last year was unique because last year was the first year that we actually saw the pass offense actually look really dangerous against bad teams
at times. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and where you started to see okay, and this is kind of my comment about, when people talk about the receiving core and things along those lines. And it's like, look, I know they weren't as good as they needed to be. But the reality is it was still a group that when you break it down, it was still a group that when they played inferior opponents, they dominated.
Sure.
I mean, they weren't just good, but they dominated. But the same story that's been true for so long, Vince, was also true, which is, they didn't play well when it mattered. And when you look at the pass offense last year, there's some good things that we saw last year, 9.1 yards per attempt. That's pretty good. That's the best Notre Dame has had pass game wise in a very long time. Matter of fact, going back over the numbers, 9.1 last year was good. They were 8.0 the year before that, 8.1, 7.9, 7.9, 8.0, 6.6, 7.9, 8.8 back in 2015, 8.0, 7.7, 7.5, 6.9, 6.8, and then 8.7. Well, that 8.7, we had Jimmy Clausen, Michael Floyd, and Golden Tate. So, the 9.1, you're like, boy, that's really good. And this is what makes last year's offense so difficult to discuss. Because on one side, you have a group of people that just only focus on the big games and act like Jared Parker sucked because of this, and the receiving corps sucked because of this, and Sam Hartman sucked because they didn't play well in big games, and completely ignore what happened against the inferior teams. Now, you don't get paid at Notre Dame. Your legacy is not built around what you do against the inferior opponents. But when you're analyzing where they are based on where they need to go, you have to be willing to look at that. And when you look at last season and you look at what they did to the teams that were less than, I mean, they ripped them up, Vince. I mean, they ripped Navy up. They ripped Tennessee State up. They ripped Central Michigan up through the air. They ripped up Pitt through the air. They ripped up Wake Forest through the air. They ripped up Oregon State on the air. They would have done that against Stanford if they needed to. But when you run for 350 yards and Audric Estime is a man possessed, you're like, we're good. Sam had a bad pick early, and they just didn't need to throw the football. So you have to be willing to look at that and say, hey, look, they definitely made progress because they had talented players. They had a 6-year senior at quarterback. You had a really good tight end. You had talented, fast receivers at certain spots, and your freshman class was pretty talented. But when you got into big games, this team was way different. And that's really what it boils down to, Vince, is will they get better? Look, I fully expect this offense to do exactly what it did last year, Vince, at the very minimum. And that is they're going to rip up the bad teams and struggle against the good teams. Like, that's the minimum of what we're going to see this year. Like, I fully expect the yards to be better, and there's a lot of I expect to be better just because the talents can be better. What we have to learn and what we have to find out, Vince, is can they be better in those big games? And my point is, well, I should say this. Let me rephrase the minimum, because I just made it seem like I predicted this is what it's going to be. Here's what I mean. Let me put it differently, because I think you know where I meant to go with that one. I could see it in your face. The minimum, this team is going to rip up the inferior opponents in the pass game. That's the minimum. The question then becomes, okay, what do they do in the big games? And for people that are still in the chat, but the big games are what matters. Okay, calm down. Listen for a second. Okay, like, we've said that. The big games are what you evaluate. But what you have to be willing to do is say, okay, as a whole, have they made progress? Are they better? And the answer is they took a step last year in some regards. And really 2 of the last 3 years that they've had a veteran quarterback, they've actually had some really good moments throwing the football. They're not there yet because they don't play well in the big games, right? Nobody acknowledges the big games aren't the problem. The thing you have to be willing to look about, however, is to say, okay, but are they still just the same pass offense they've always been, or are they maybe making strides in other areas, and now it's time to get to that next level? And that's going to be the question. Can they take that next level? Because you can't ignore, Vince, a couple things. You can't ignore how good they were last year throwing the ball at times. Last season, for example, Notre Dame averaged 285.1 yards per game. And if you break the schedule into 2 segments, there's what I believe are the 6 best teams in the schedule, which is NC State, Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, USC, and Clemson. Right? That's my 6. I took Oregon State out because the version of Oregon State that Notre Dame faced is not the top 25 team during the regular season. Okay?
Agreed.
And then the other 7 games are Navy, Tennessee State, Central Michigan, Pitt, Wake, Stanford, Oregon State. Notre Dame averaged 285.1 yards per game against those opponents that were not those teams, right? So when you look at the production over the course of the year, you say, well, you look at your top 6, your bottom 7 opponents. Notre Dame ripped them up pretty good. I mean, they did some serious damage against them, and the difference is when you look at this team, Vince, the difference last year and years before is that right there. I mean, you can't ignore that right there, that they were better. And here's an example. If you look at 2021, okay, and you look at how they did against the 7 bottom opponents on the schedule, they averaged 212.3 yards per game passing, right? 212.3. So clearly they were better last year than they were in past years. If you look at where they were in 2021 and you look at what they did against the opponents that were not, you consider the top opponents, and then Notre Dame averaged 314 yards passing per game that season. Actually, I don't know that I'm doing that math right. Let me just factor that real quick, because I don't know that that's correct. So just give me 1 second. So that's 6 games. They played 13 games. Yeah, because they had 509 yards in the bowl game. So let me just do this math without the crazy bowl game experience here real quick, Vince, and I'll give you what I'm referring to in the regular season. So in the regular season against their not their top 2 opponents, they were 282.2 yards per game, right? So we've seen in those moments that there was with Jack Cohn and Sam Hartman, way better production in those lesser half games. In 2022, they just couldn't throw the ball on anybody. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But here's the problem with 2021. I had to count Florida State as one of their top 6 opponents. That's how soft their schedule was, because it was at least a big moment, even though they ended up not being a good team. But if you look at the 5 teams that they played that year that actually like had good teams, and you look at what they were in the 5 big games where teams were actually good, they only averaged 220 yards per game per passing the ball. In 2022, against the 6 top teams on the schedule, they averaged 201 passing yards per game. And last year, against the top 6 teams in the schedule, they only averaged 201.5 yards per game. So even though they've been better against the lesser opponents with the veteran quarterbacks, nothing's changed. And in fact, if you go back and look at 2022, they actually had more passing yards per game against the best teams on the schedule than they did last year or the year before.
Really? That's actually
about
shocking.
11 yards. Yeah. Well, part of it's because they had 318 yards in the win over USC, because USC's defense was not good. And then one of those 6 best teams was North Carolina, who had a terrible defense. They passed for 289 yards.
True.
And then the other games I had were Ohio State, Marshall, Syracuse, and Clemson. But they threw for only 201 yards combined in wins over Syracuse and Clemson. That's just not going to get it done.
Right.
So the point is while I believe Notre Dame has raised the bar throwing the football, statistically, I expect that to continue thanks to the arrival of the talent that they have and Mike Denbrock. The question is going to remain, can they go out there against the best teams on the schedule and hurt them throwing the football? That's really what this conversation comes down to. And ultimately, that's going to determine how good this team can be. Are they a playoff team that maybe wins a home game? Sure. And then after that, you're kind of outclassed, or maybe you win 2 playoff games because you get a Big 12 team in the second round. You're just better than they are, and you win that one. Then you get to semifinals, and we're back to where we used to be, where you get ripped up by 3 touchdowns. That's really where Notre Dame is going to be, because they haven't been able to have those moments in big games. And Vince, that's been true for however long. I mean, you look at 2020. Right, last time Notre Dame had a really, really excellent team. They went into the postseason, passed for 19 yards against Clemson, 7.8 per attempt. That's terrible. They threw for 236 yards against Bama, only 5.6 yards per attempt, 0 passing touchdowns in those 2 games in the postseason. You look at 2018, they get to the postseason against Clemson, only passed for 160 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. So in your last 3 postseason games against an opponent that was on your level, Notre Dame has not thrown a single touchdown pass. Not one. And if you go back to, if you look at the biggest postseason games Notre Dame has played, would you agree that it's Bama in 2012, Ohio State in 2015, and LSU in 2017, Clemson in 2018, and then Clemson and Bama in 2020. So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 postseason games. Is that accurate? Right? In those games, Vince, they've only thrown 5 touchdown passes.
Wow.
And if you go back and look at it, a couple of them were late. 2012, they had a late touchdown pass when they were getting killed by Bama. And then that LSU team they beat was good, but not great. People will point to Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl. I don't care about Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl. They didn't have their defensive coordinator. There was nothing on the line. It wasn't this game matters. All the games that I just pointed to, something was on the line. 2020 ACC championship, 2020 playoff game. And that's why you could even say 2017 LSU, you could even take that out of the mix, because, I mean, there wasn't any line.
Yeah.
But what was on the line was Brian Kelly's career.
It's true.
If after 2016, you come out, you get a lot of positive vibes, and then you completely go in the tank down the stretch. Because remember, at one point in time, Notre Dame in 2017 was 8-1 and ranked very high, and then they got killed by Miami. Beat Navy barely, got spanked by Stanford. If they go out and lose to LSU and they lose 3 of their last 4, all the positive momentum from that previous season are gone. So it's even the number's even worse, Vince, if you take the LSU game out, which you probably should, and you look at the Ohio State game in 2015, which I thought was a huge moment for Notre Dame. You look at the Clemson bowl game or the Clemson title playoff game, the Bama playoff game, and then the Clemson ACC title game and the Bama game. You only have 5 games, 3 touchdown passes in those games. None of them were competitive. None of them were competitive. And if that doesn't change, Vince, then at the end of the day, when the season ends, it's going to be the same story for Notre Dame. The numbers are going to look better. The stats will, you know what I mean? The stats will be better for a host of reasons we'll get into. But at the end of the day, Vince, it's about, can you do it when it matters most?
Sure.
And that's where a lot of what we're going to talk about is focused on. When we talk about concerns and reasons to be optimistic and all those type of things, it's not about, well, can they throw the ball on Northern Illinois and Purdue and Miami of Ohio and Virginia, or honestly, even Texas A&M, although I would say that will tell us something because it is a big road game and all those type of reasons. But what are they going to do when it matters most? Can they throw the ball against Louisville this year? Can they throw the ball against Florida State this year? Can they throw the ball against USC this year? Can they throw the ball against A&M? And then when they get to the postseason, can they throw the ball then? Like, look, Notre Dame is absolutely a running football team. They're always going to be a team that is built around being able to run the football. Vince, I don't ever want that to change.
Right.
But to win a championship in the modern era,
you got to throw it.
You can't be 1988 Notre Dame.
Right.
You just can't. You're just not going to win that way.
It's not realistic.
Especially if you've got to win 4 games.
Right.
There may be games where in the playoff where you can go out there and say, hey, we're going to go out there and we're going to run the ball all over this 12 seed. Okay, cool. Maybe you're able to do that in the second round against an ACC champ or Big 12 champ or a not that great Big 10 or SEC champ in one of those years where maybe that's the case. But once you get in the semifinals, you're right back to where you were in a 14 playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're playing the cream of the crop. Can you throw the ball? Now you're playing teams will have equal talent that you have, or at least close. Maybe slightly more, maybe slightly less, but they're in the ballpark. That's where Notre Dame has had problems over the years. And that's where we're going to find out if this team can really take it to that next step. You know, and there's reasons to be optimistic.
Sure.
But they've got to prove it. And so what this show is going to focus on, Vince, when we talk about the offense is, okay, what are the reasons to be optimistic? What are the big concerns? Who are the key players involved in making it successful in those moments? Because with the talent they have at quarterback and receiver, I mean, I wrote an article today, Vince, about, you know, the receiving core and how the transfer class has been so instrumental in the optimism about that. Here's a number for you. If the transfer class doesn't show up, Notre Dame would be returning. This would be their returning production at receiver from last year. 61 catches, 942 yards, and 12 touchdowns. That's their returning production at receiver from last season. That's it. All right. Now you add the transfers in, 131 catches, 2,038 yards, and 10 touchdowns is what those guys had by themselves.
Okay.
Now you add them to the roster, and it's 192 catches, 2,980 yards, and 22 touchdowns last season. Not for their careers, last season. And you start to say, okay, there's no doubt Northern Illinois is in trouble. Miami of Ohio is in trouble. Purdue's in trouble. Virginia's in trouble. Army's in trouble. Navy's in trouble. That's why I'm still like, dude, I don't care who the quarterback is. This is a 10-win team. Should be a 10-win team just because on talent alone. But again, your standard at Notre Dame isn't, can you go 10-2 every year?
Right.
Your standard is, can you compete for a championship? And so will the things we discuss be enough, or what the concerns are relative to how they perform in the biggest moments and what they do when they get to the postseason? That's going to be the question. And again, I'm not saying they're not going to. What I'm saying is that's the unknown. Right. We can be as optimistic as we want to be, but it's now show me mode. And these are the things that we think that are going to need to be done or can be done, or reasons why we think that this may be the year we do start to see that from this offense. And that's what kind of gets me a little fired up, Vince.
I don't know how it couldn't get you fired up. And, you know, we have grown accustomed to the past game dominating the inferior opponents. I mean, we have, right? I mean, we go into these games and we expect fireworks and we expect high scores and we expect points and we expect yards and all of those things. And that's one of the things that we actually give Brian Kelly a lot of credit for from when he was here, is that and I know we're talking past games specifically, but overall, they're beating the teams they should beat on a regular basis. And that wasn't always the case pre-2016. Post-2016, it really was, right? And that's not always an easy thing to do, right? I mean, this is still college football, and there's still, the any given Sunday kind of a deal with the NFL. I mean, it's a similar situation, but he made it so that they win those games.
And Brian Kelly deserves credit for that.
Absolutely.
Because they didn't do that, like you said, pre-2015.
Right.
There's plenty of games we could point to. You're like, how do you lose that game?
Exactly.
How do you lose to 4-8 Northwestern? How do you lose to Tulsa? That's they're a decent team, but they're inferior to you. How do you lose to Navy by 18 points? There were so many of those games you're just like, I don't know how you lose that game.
Right.
And one thing that Brian Kelly corrected a lot because of the hires he made, Matt Bayless and Mike Oko and Clark Lee and Chip Long and guys like that, with Matt Bayless being at the very top of that list, you got to give him credit for that. And Marcus Freeman learned in year one of his first year, those are not easy games to win. If you can't
look past them.
You're right, exactly. And that's why you lost to Marshall. That's why you lost to Stanford.
Right.
And so then, of course, in year two, you felt good that, okay, I think Coach Freeman's figured out that you've got to have a certain mindset for these moments.
Sure.
And last year, yes, Brian Kelly always won those games, but they weren't always the prettiest wins.
That's fair.
Right.
That's fair.
And the teams that were really bad, they would blow out. I mean, you look at 2019, they blew out New Mexico. They blew out Bowling Green. They weren't very good. They had to come back against Virginia. They struggled to beat a very mediocre USC team that year. They had to come back late and beat a mediocre Virginia Tech team that year. So there were some games, they had some blowout wins, but there was also some games where they struggled against teams that honestly just weren't that good.
Mm-hmm.
What Marcus Freeman's team did last year was they not only beat those teams, they obliterated those teams. I mean, they weren't even competitive football games. Like the Pitt game, Notre Dame played like trash in the first quarter of that game and won 58-7.
Right.
I mean, you have Sam Hartman throwing picks, and you got all these mistakes. He ended up throwing 2 picks that game, and they still beat them. I don't think the offense played great against Wake Forest. They still won 45-7. Those are the things you look at, Vince, and say this team has shown. Like, look, we're like the big dogs now in that regard. Because like when Ohio State plays an inferior opponent, 99 times out of there's the occasional Purdue 2018. There's the occasional, you weren't locked in against the Maryland. You have to outscore them. But by and large, you go back and look at Ohio State over the years, when they're playing significantly inferior opponents, they blow them out.
Right.
Alabama blows those teams out. There's always Georgia 2019 gets upset at home by 4-8 South Carolina. Those games happen every now and then. But by and large, when Georgia's played an inferior opponent, they've blown them out. That's what the best teams do. That's progress.
Mm-hmm.
But those teams also beat the better teams. And most of Kirby Smart's losses, like in big games in his career, were to the same person, Nick Saban. You know what I mean? So those are things you look at and say, this team's got to show that. But you can't ignore the fact that they've figured out how to beat everybody else. And that's what kind of gives you a confidence that the baseline's at least going to be here as a team, as an offense. But we have to find out if they can do that next thing, and that's going to be something very interesting to see how it unfolds. And we're going to express some reasons why we actually think it's going to be a positive this year, but then also things that could maybe derail it.
Right. Before we get into that, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends, and jump on the boards, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Intel's dropping every day, folks. So if you're not part of the boards, I don't know what to tell you. So you got to get over there. It's a great investment. If you're a true Notre Dame fan, great investment for you. So make sure you make that happen. Part one of our dissection of the offensive pass game is going to be a fun one, Brian. And look, there's reasons to be optimistic, obviously, for this pass game. And we kind of sort of touched on them a little bit in the open, but we're going to get a little bit of a deeper dive. And then, of course, there's some unknowns or some concerns that we have going into the season as well. And we're going to talk about those too. But let's start with the glass half full, Brian. And let's start with our optimistic, why we're optimistic about this offensive pass game. And I think I mean, let's be honest. It all starts with the guy calling the plays and
Sure.
the coup that Marcus Freeman made by bringing in Mike Denbrock and
Mhm.
what he brings to the table and his long-standing history in offensive game planning and offensive play calling at his last 2 stops and what they've been able to do. I mean,
Really the last 3 stops.
fair
You
enough.
know what I mean?
Fair
Like,
enough. But I mean, bringing in Mike Denbrock was
yeah.
just a huge move that just makes everybody who thinks offense and wants Notre Dame to win just kind of gives them a
Right.
sigh of relief and some excitement.
Well, I'll say this, Vince. Part of the reason that I have optimism is because the last time Notre Dame was actually good on offense against the best teams they played was with Mike Denbrock. So I gave you the numbers where they were barely over 200 yards against the top teams on the schedule. If you go look at the three Notre Dame played 3 top 5 teams that year in 2015. They passed for 321 yards in a last-second loss to Clemson. They passed for 234 yards, 9.4 yards per attempt against number 3 Stanford in the last-second loss. And by the way, part of the reason they only, quote-unquote, only passed for 234 yards is because they ran for 299 in that game. Okay? And then against Ohio State in the postseason, they threw for 284 yards. So, like, and then you look at the other, I would say the best teams in the schedule. They threw for 313 yards against Texas. They threw for 262, 10.5 per attempt against USC, and then threw for 299 yards against Temple, who if you remember, had a great defense that year. So that was the last time Notre Dame was really good, was the last year that Mike Denbrock had full control of the Notre Dame offense.
Right.
That's the last time we saw this offense in big moments be competent. And the reason they weren't better as a team is because they had one of the worst defensive coordinators in the history of Notre Dame football and in college football at that time. And now you don't have that problem because Mike Denbrock's going to have a far better sidekick. Mm-hmm. And honestly, it's partly why they had the success they had at Cincinnati in 2020, 2021, because you had strengths on both sides of the ball. Obviously, Marcus Freeman being the defensive coordinator in 2020 at Cincinnati when they went undefeated and almost beat Georgia in the Peach Bowl. I mean, Cincinnati was 9-0, 10-0 that year. Only loss was in the Peach Bowl to Georgia. A lot of people thought Cincinnati should have got into the playoff over Notre Dame. I don't agree. But they go to the Peach Bowl against Georgia and they lose by 2 points, I think, 2 points in that game. And so those things help, Vince. Those things help a ton. And when you look at Mike Denbrock, he's got that track record of success. And even at LSU the last couple of years, I mean, their offense wasn't always good.
Right.
And you're never going to always be good. Sometimes you're going to have those games where your offense doesn't light the world on fire. I mean, even as good as that 2019 offense was against at LSU, they still had a game where they beat Auburn 23-20. You're going to have those days. But when you look at LSU, Vince, I mean, even last year, the offense was not the problem in big games. In their loss to Florida State, they had 459 yards of offense, 7.2 yards per play. In a road loss against top 10 Mississippi, Ole Miss, they had 637 yards of offense, 8.5 yards per play. In a road win over a top 10 Missouri team, they had 533 yards, 8.1 yards per play. In a road loss at Alabama, they scored 28 points at 478 yards and averaged 8.2 yards per play. Like, that's what they did last year. Same thing the year before. First game, not great. Against Florida State, you go for 348 yards, 5.4 yards per play. Wasn't great. And then you go out against Mississippi State. You have 417 yards, 5.6 yards per carry. They're a ranked team. Play a ranked Tennessee team. You get smacked, right? Threw the ball well. They couldn't run the ball. Threw for 300 yards that game, but couldn't run the ball. Then you play an Alabama team. You score 32 points. You have that great drive at the end. You average 5.6 yards per play. And you have 549 yards in a postseason loss in the SEC title game against Georgia. 7.6 yards per play. So by and large, way more often than not at LSU, Mike Denbrock's offenses were good no matter who they played. And that's going to be a key. And so, we're going to find out if he can build that same thing at Notre Dame, right? Because he's going to have a completely different type of roster. He won't have a Jaden Daniels. He's going to have Riley Leonard, different players.
Sure.
He doesn't have Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas at Notre Dame. He's going to have good receivers, but not that. But LSU didn't have a Mitchell Evans and didn't have a Jeremiah Love and I don't even think had a Jadarian Price, honestly. So there's going to be some differences to what they do, but he's shown in his career he can win with different type of offenses. So, why, right? Attention to detail is going to be greater. Mike Denbrock is an aggressive play caller without being too aggressive, right? They're going to throw the ball down the field, but they're not a team that throws the ball down the field 100 times. It's just we're always going to be looking for that opportunity to beat you deep and scheme you to beat you deep. Brings a nice blend of scheme to the table. Horizontal stretch, vertical stretch. He's really good at creating isolate. He understands the importance of creating, isolation matchups, right? Where we're going to use this formation, this alignment, move this guy here, do this with motion because we want to get this guy matched up right here in this look, in this particular situation. And so those are things you look at and say, he's bringing that type of experience and talent to the table. And he's also someone who's shown a willingness and ability to alter what the strengths are based on what he thinks his team strengths are. So if they got a great line and they can run it on people, he's going to run it on people. If he doesn't think he has the advantage in the trenches, he's going to game plan in a way that negates that lack of advantage. And he's going to do it a lot of different ways. So you're bringing in a guy with a proven track record in those moments. I mean, Jared Parker showed last year, like, give me the better team and I'm going to rip you up.
Sure.
But Jared Parker didn't have the experience or the ability last season to go out there and do that when the talent wasn't pro Notre Dame or the coaching wasn't pro Notre Dame. And those are things that you won't, like, for example, I'd be shocked if Mike Denbrock takes Audric Estime off the field on that last drive. Like, not after one carry. Like, things like that just are that savviness. Like, look, man, I know what our game plan was coming in, but right now I'm watching this. We are leaning on them. We are pushing them off the ball. We're going. And if he would have taken Audric Estime off the field, probably would have been in a pistol or under eye situation, and you're just running duo downhill. He's not trying to run some misdirection thing to catch him off guard, that type of stuff, which is what happened on those two plays that Ohio State blew up. Those are things that you look at, Vince, and say that's what a veteran play caller is just going to have that feel for the moment.
Sure.
And Mike Denbrock's been in a lot of big moments like this in his career. He's coached in title games, national title games. He's coached in Fiesta Bowls. He's coached in the college football playoff. He's coached in all these types of situations, Vince. SEC title games, huge moments in big crowded stadiums. He's had some failures in those moments. He's had some successes in those moments, and they've all led him to where he is now. So I think that more than anything is the biggest reason for optimism for me. And I like Tommy Rees. I like Jared Parker. I've defended them more than most the last couple years. But the reality is this is the biggest reason for optimism, because I'm not confident that those two coaches would have been able to get the most out of this roster. I'd have said potentially they can, but I don't know that they can. Yeah. With Mike Denbrock, you just kind of assume it's going to happen because he's just shown he can be that guy over the last 10 years.
Speaking of the roster, yet another reason to be optimistic is a player that you mentioned during the Mike Denbrock talk, and that's Riley Leonard and what he brings to the table as a high level, championship level type quarterback. And that, as you are well aware, when you're calling plays, having good players certainly helps. And having a signal caller like Riley Leonard, and again, when we talk about this stuff, we are anticipating, health and all of those things. And so I just want to put that as a caveat.
Sure.
Just because I know how some people are. I mean, I've got the chat off, but I understand. Oh, he's injury. We're not going there.
Haven't had that yet.
Okay,
far.
Good. Yeah. Okay, good. But we're talking about Riley Leonard and what he has been able to do on the field when healthy. And he's a championship level quarterback. And so, again, bringing in Mike Denbrock, you also brought in Riley Leonard. It's going to be a huge part of the passing game this year. And it's a very big reason to be optimistic.
Well, when you look at Riley Leonard, Vince, you look at a kid that took over at Duke for a team that the year before went 3-9.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 3 years before he arrived, went 10-26.
Sweet.
Before his injury against Notre Dame, right? And I'm gonna include the Notre Dame loss, but past that, he had led Duke to a 13-5 record in 18 games, right? 18 games. Where in the 3 previous years, in 3 full seasons, which was 36 games, they won 10. Now, Mike Elko's arrival had something to do with that. And Mike Elko's a heck of a football coach. But Mike Elko doesn't go 9-4 in 2022 if he doesn't have Riley Leonard at quarterback.
Right.
Now, what I don't know is how Riley is going to be in the state. Riley hasn't played in front of 112,000 screaming, Texans, right? I mean,
it's true.
But he also has never played with the kind of town around him that he's going to have at Notre Dame either. But you can't look at what Mike Denbrock's done with his last 2 quarterbacks and not get excited about what might be coming to Notre Dame this season, because you look at what he did, obviously with Jane Daniels, we know what he did there. But even Desmond Ridder, I mean, Vince, I was never a Desmond Ridder fan. Still am not a Desmond Ridder fan. But that's a kid that threw for over 3,300 yards this last year with Mike Denbrock, 30 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. And I don't even think he's that good. And just I look at it now and I'm thinking, dude, like you give a guy like Riley Leonard, Mike Denbrock calling plays, and you're going to feel a certain way about what you think he can be, because
right.
Riley's the kind of kid that can put a team on his shoulders and carry them to victory. But at Notre Dame, he doesn't always have to do that. Right? Like, that's the difference. It's like, dude, we don't need you to go out there and be Superman to beat every team we play every week. I mean, you just watched last year when he got hurt, that offense just could do nothing the rest. Even in games where he played but couldn't run, the offense could do nothing. At Notre Dame, it's like, dude, you're going to have to be that guy. You're going to have to put the cape on sometimes. If we're going to win a championship, looking at, if I'm looking at it from, I'm a coach talking to Riley, hey, we're going to need you to put the cape on sometimes. We just are. There's going to be a game where our defense doesn't have it that day like they normally do, or our line doesn't have it, or our receivers or whatever. That team is just on fire, and we're going to need you to put the cape on and win this one for us. But it's not going to be every week like it was a lot of times at Duke, where if Riley didn't play well, then not only did the offense not do anything, they couldn't win.
Exactly.
And he won't have that kind of pressure, but he does have the ability to do it. And with Sam Hartman, I think in some ways Sam gets a bit of a bum rap for how last season went, partly because of his own, some things he did, but a lot of it is, Sam Hartman was never a quarterback that you went and signed and said, okay, he's going to put this team on his shoulders and carry you to victory. Sam Hartman's the type of quarterback that's always dependent on people around him doing their jobs. I'm going to get you the ball where it needs to go to, but you got to do your job. You got to block for me. You got to run the route. You got to catch the ball. And when his players weren't consistently doing that last year, I think he lost confidence in them and in himself.
Yep, completely agree. He looked like a different player the second half of the season. He just did. Right. He carried himself differently, and it was a lack of confidence, no question about it.
And it was confidence around what's around him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where he couldn't put that team on his shoulders and say, let's go. Now, he did it that one time against Duke, right? Everyone does it every now and then. But it's not something where he was going to consistently make a living, going down and just saying, okay, I'm going to run around. I'm going to make this play. I'm going to throw this bullet. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. That's not who Sam Hartman was. And they didn't recruit him to be that.
Right.
To be honest with you. And so you can't fault him for that. But you did recruit Riley Leonard to be that. And then you went out and put some pieces around him that are very impressive. And that's obviously the next part of what we're going to talk about.
Good. Man, that's like a professional transition. That was well played. And so you are absolutely correct that the pieces that came in around Riley Leonard are a huge reason for optimism. And it's not just the pieces that were brought in. It's also some pieces that were already here. And we're talking about the wide receiver unit. And when you take the pieces that were here and you add it in with the pieces that have arrived, then this is about the deepest wide receiver room as honestly as I can remember, Brian, and you're so much better with the history than I am, but this is
pure talent. Room. I don't remember.
This is a deep room.
Yeah,
I mean,
I remember that.
Yeah. There have been years in the past where, we're talking about, a 6-man rotation. Maybe they expand it to 7 or maybe even 8 at times, this year. And it's like, okay, who are those 6 or 7, 8 going to be? Because there's some serious battles for those spots. And in the past, it was like, okay, who's going to start at wide receiver? Because I'm not sure they're much deeper than that, to be honest. You know what I mean? So it's just a different scenario.
And you are always in those situations where, and we've talked about this before, we don't need to talk about too much, but you're always in situations where if the other team could shut down the tight end, or if your guy that you thought was going to be your guy didn't pan out or got hurt, you were in trouble.
Yeah.
2022 was, boy, they really need Lorenzo Styles to step up, and he didn't, and it's hurt the whole unit. And when you look at you look at 2021 and you look at Kevin Austin, when Kevin Austin was really good, that offense was really good. When Kevin Austin struggled like he did against, he was terrible against Cincinnati. And guess what? Offense completely disappeared because you were almost entirely dependent on your Minnesota football on whether or not Kevin Austin was ready to step up and play well. 2020, I mean, you had good receivers, but you didn't have guys that you were going to go out there against Bama and they were going to win. And you just didn't have that type of team. And partly in 2020, the issue was you thought you were going to have Kevin Austin that year, and he got hurt, and couldn't play. You add Kevin Austin to that receiving core of Ben Skoranek and Javon McKinley and a focused Kevin Austin, we might be talking about something then with Michael Mayer at tight end and Tommy Trumbull and Brock Wright and all that. But he got hurt, and all of a sudden, boom, you're out. But that's the whole point, though, Vince, right? One injury could completely derail that team, those teams. One guy not performing well could completely derail those receiving cores. Now you're not in that situation. I mean, you're really not. So, I mean, you could right now. My projection for the starting lineup, just as of today, based on what we've seen in practice, is Chris Mitchell at Z, Jaden Greathouse in the slot, Jaden Thomas in the boundary.
Yep.
Right. If you lost all three of those guys, you'd have a starting lineup of Jordan Faison, Jaden Harrison, and Bo Collins with KK Smith, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, and Logan Saldate, and Deion Colsey coming off the bench. Like, that's basically been their receiving core in previous years, but not with as much speed. But you still have those guys. So, I mean, you're talking about right now, your third string wide receivers would be probably KK Smith, Jaden Harrison, and the reason I'm going this way is because Jordan Faison has kind of playing both.
Yeah, he has.
And I would assume that right now, like Jordan would go out to Z if Chris Mitchell got hurt full time, as opposed to KK. But pick one. But for now, I'm just going to go with the way it is now. But you'd have KK Smith playing Z with Cam Williams as his backup. You've got Jaden Harrison playing the slot with Logan Saldate as his backup. And you've got Micah Gilbert in the boundary with Deion Colsey as his backup. That's if you lost your entire first two lines of receivers. That's basically what last year's receiving core was, Vince.
Pretty much.
And so when you look at it now, you're talking about you do have Chris Mitchell, you do have Jaden Greathouse, you do have Jaden Thomas, you do have Bo Collins, Jordan Faison, Jaden Harrison, KK Smith, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, and Logan Saldate, Deion Colsey. I mean, it's hard not to get fired up about that, Vince, because why? A lot of talent, a lot of depth of talent, a lot of different type of talent. What's something that we complained about last year? I know Ryan and I talked about this. I don't know that you and I talked about this a whole lot because we don't do as many shows during the season except for post games. But you had a bunch of guys that kind of all did the same thing outside of Chris Tyree and Tobias Merriweather.
Yeah.
Like Rico Flores, everybody, they all kind of did the same exact thing. This year, you have a much different group from a diversity of skill set standpoint. They're not all slots, and some of the slots have to play outside. You've got some size to them. Now, Tobias was tall, but Tobias was skinny. He wasn't a muscle guy. Bo can be a little bit of that, especially when Jaden Thomas got hurt, right? And so you had all those aspects to this year's receiving core. And last year, honestly, Vince, it's like if Tobias and Jaden Thomas don't step up, your receiving core is in big, big trouble. Tobias didn't step up for whatever reason. We can debate whether he was given a shot or didn't. It doesn't matter. The fact is the end result was the same. Whatever you blame for why Tobias wasn't better last year is irrelevant because the result is the result, right? Jaden Thomas gets hurt again, and he's not healthy. He goes through a month and a half where he doesn't catch a pass. And the whole receiving core just got jacked up when that happened. This year, you're in much better position to where if you have an injury, it sucks, but you're fine. Just keep rolling. And so it's that margin for error is so much greater this year. And also in past years, if you had really good guys that could cover in short area, this pass offense struggled because you couldn't stretch the field the same way. You didn't have guys that could get off pressure. You didn't have big bodies. The fact that they have different types of receivers this year allows them to attack defenses differently depending on what the strengths and weaknesses are of those teams. And all those reasons are when you look at this receiving core is just another reason why the expectation is I think this receiving core has a chance to be really, really good. They have a lot to prove, Vince, but they have a chance to be really, really good.
Another aspect of the pass game that isn't always an aspect of the pass game, but it definitely will be this year, and it's the weapons that are going to be coming out of the backfield. And obviously, specifically Jeremiah Love, and we have discussed this, a bunch in the offseason about how he's been working at slot and he's been doing some different things and all of that. But, when you've got a playmaker like Jeremiah Love, you want to get the ball in his hands, and that is going to be a special aspect to this pass game where defenses are going to have to pick their poison, in my opinion. Are you bracketing some wide receivers? What are you going to do in the pass game? And then all of a sudden you've got Jeremiah Love matched up with a linebacker or a nickel or something along those lines. And frankly, I give the nod to Notre Dame in most of those scenarios.
Which Jeremiah Love out of the backfield big time.
Yeah.
And again, we've talked about how Mike Denbrock has shown an ability to utilize certain weapons. Well, you think about the Clemson game in 2015, and you think about it's raining. They're not able to run the ball. The offensive line couldn't get a push because they couldn't plant their feet in the ground because the field was so wet. And they're bracketing Will Fuller the whole game, and you're just like, dude, I don't know what we're going to do here. Well, Mike Denbrock figured it out, right? He started using Chris Brown a lot on crossers and overs and ripped off some big plays. But what was the play that really sprung things in that 2015 game against Clemson? It was a wheel route to his running back out of the backfield for a 50-plus yard touchdown. And that's what it was. And that's the thing that kind of sprung that game open. And if you look at CJ Prosise before his injury, in a 5-game stretch, starting with Clemson and ending with Pitt when he got hurt, he had 20 catches in 5 games. And he had a 100-yard performance against Clemson. He had 56 yards against Navy, he had 32 yards against USC, he had 43 yards catching against Temple and 29 against Pitt. In a game, he got knocked out in the first half. So in 5 games, he had 20 catches for 260 yards in 5 games. And because that's when he was started to get real comfortable as the starting running back. That's not normally what Mike Denbrock has done in the past. He didn't use the running backs a ton out of the pass game last year. However, what did they do to start the season off? They ran a bootleg throwback to the running back for a 50-something yard gain against Florida State in the first play. I think it was first play of the game. So he'll use it, but when he's got a guy that can be that kind of weapon out of the backfield, he will build the offense around it. And you started to see him doing that with CJ Prosise. Why? Because CJ had that unique skill set. 6'1", fast, former receiver, very athletically very similar to Jeremiah. And so you'll see him doing that. But then also you've got Jadarian coming out of the backfield as a unique weapon, as more of a traditional running back. And those are things, Vince, that kind of say, okay, that's just more weapons. And dude, we're not even going to spend time, honestly, talking about the tight ends because that's the one given. Seriously.
You can be optimistic about it. That's fine.
But that's not they're going to be better now because of the tight ends. They've always had good tight ends.
Right.
The tight ends are going to be good this year. It's
correct.
Can the tight ends be complemented effectively, or even they become the ideal situation for Notre Dame? I don't care how good your tight end is that they're the complementary weapon to your receivers and other guys, not the other way around. And even when Tyler Eifert's your tight end, you still want to have a Michael Floyd. And it's not a coincidence that Tyler Eifert had his best statistical year during a season not when he was the number 1 weapon. He had more production in 2011 as the number 2 weapon than he did in 2012 as the primary weapon, because then teams couldn't focus on him as much. And I'm going to back that up. That's not just an opinion. In 2011, Tyler Eifert had 63 catches for 803 yards and 5 touchdowns. That year, Michael Floyd was your top guy. He had 100 catches for 1,147 yards and 9 touchdowns. The next year, Tyler Eifert had 50 catches for 685 yards and 4 touchdowns because he was the number 1 weapon. And it's easier to take a tight end out of the game than it is. It's easier to take Tyler Eifert out of the game than it is to take Will Fuller out of the game. It's just the way the defense works. I'm not saying Will Fuller is a better player than Tyler Eifert. That's just a reality of it.
Sure.
So your tight ends are already strong. But your tight ends were strong last year. Your tight end's not the reason you lost Ohio State. He was brilliant against Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like Mitchell Evans was great against Ohio State. I mean, he when you're down 14-10, he catches a big long pass down the field against Louisville, but it comes back because you have an illegal hands to the face by your offensive lineman drive stalls. Right? Their problem last year and during that stretch of bad offensive play, Vince, was not Mitchell Evans. Because that was when he was at his best, was during that stretch of football. It's because what was around him wasn't good enough. So tight ends set. It's the other stuff that starts to get excited about how good this group can be, because you don't need Mitchell Evans to be Hercules this year. He just go do your job.
Right.
Right. And sometimes you're going to have to carry the load because you're getting one-on-ones. Other times, if they're trying to stop you, that's cool. Get your 2 catches for 30 yards and make sure you're down there celebrating with all your teammates when we're scoring all those touchdowns to other people. And that's just the way that it's going to be. And that's what gets you fired. That's, to me, Vince, is what kind of has me so fired up about what this team can be this year. It's not just Mike. It's like, I don't care how good of a coach you are. Don't care. If you don't have dudes, you don't have dudes. I mean, like I pointed this out before. In 5 years as a coach, I coached 2 All-Americans and 7 all-conference players in 5 years. All of them could play. My job was just, okay, you've got dudes, get them coached up, get the most out of them, right? I mean, you can't take players that are mediocre and say, okay, we're going to go win a national championship because you're a phenomenal coach. You're going to win more games than you otherwise would, right? But you're not going to – I mean, Kyle Whittingham, Mike Gundy, Vince, I think you and I both agree are great coaches, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Have they ever even been in the conversation
Never.
for a national title?
Sniffed.
I mean, you had the 1 year with Mike Gundy in 2011, that one freaky year where I actually thought they should have played for the title. Outside of that, Mike Gundy's had 1 year where his team competed for a title. Kyle Whittingham's had 0. Why? Because he's getting the most out of the team, but the team still isn't talented enough, and the program's not capable of going and winning to that next level. And so, yes, it's great to have Mike Denbrock. It's wonderful to have Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown and Dylan McCullough and those guys, but you still need the dudes. And I think this year they're much in a position where you feel like they do have the dudes.
Those are our reasons for optimism here for the past game offensively. And frankly, I'm super optimistic, but come on now, we all have to be realistic as well. And as optimistic as we are, there are also, reasons that we have to talk about the question marks or, reasons. I don't want to say for pessimism, because that's not the right term, but, concerns. There are things that, we don't know the answer to, and we are going to find the answer out together. And one of those one of those concerns is the offensive line and pass pro. And, it became a larger concern with the news of Charles Jagasaw going down and not being available for this season, and them having to find an alternate left tackle. Right. And so I think pass pro still would have been on this list, but it might not have been as big. Maybe it would have fallen down a little bit in the ranking, but it is at the top of the list for me. And I think it is at the top of the list for you as well, Brian. It's the pass pro. We just don't know what that's going to look like. And, we don't know who the starting 5 is going to be at this point. And so it's a question mark right now for sure.
It is. I mean, and it starts there, Vince. It's one of those things where what's the one thing, if all the things we talked about are true, is there anything that can stop this unit from being as good as it can be? And it's this right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the big moments, against A&M, I'm not worried about it against Miami of Ohio.
Sure.
I'm not worried about it against Northern Illinois. I'm worried about it against Texas A&M. I'm worried about it against Louisville. I'm worried about it against Florida State. And then when you get to the postseason,
sure,
USC, with their improved defensive line. That's the thing, is if they can't protect the quarterback, then no matter how good your quarterback is, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have trouble winning the biggest games. You're going to have trouble winning if that's the case.
Absolutely. And I am, like I said, it is a bigger concern than it maybe once was. And I think they'll probably get it figured out. The biggest question mark for me and the biggest concern for me is, will they get it figured out enough that it does not affect them in a negative way in week one? That's my biggest concern right now. It's week one, and can they operate at a high level in the pass game with the pass pro being a big part of that in week one? I just don't know the answer to that, and and I don't know if we're going to know the answer to that until we see them run out of the tunnel and strap it up during week one on the road in College Station. I just don't know if we're going to have the answer to that.
I don't even know that we're going to fully have the answer in that game.
And that's fair.
Because
that's fair.
This, because we're talking about, what are we talking about here, Vince, right? We're talking about the ability to kind of put this whole thing together. Can you protect the quarterback? Can you make the big plays? Can you get the ball down the field? Can you do all those things that go into being a successful pass offense, right? That's what we're talking about here. Well, yes, it's great if you can pass pro against Texas A&M, but as I've said, just because you play well one week doesn't mean you play well the next. I mean, Notre Dame's offensive line looked like world beaters against Ohio State last year. Well, I shouldn't say that's hyperbole, but they were very good against Ohio State.
They were very good. That was their best game. Yeah.
They were as good as they were against Ohio State. They were even worse than that against Duke the next week, and they were bad against Louisville. So it's going to be about doing it consistently. And then the other thing too is, if the offensive line can just hold their water, I think Notre Dame should throw the ball, because I don't Texas A&M's secondary is a little bit shaky.
Yeah.
It's solid, but that's it. It's just solid. So it's the A&M game at least gives you a taste.
Sure.
And if you can't do it against A&M, it doesn't mean that you won't do it against Louisville. It is the first game of the year. And I want to push back a little bit on this notion of we're going to know everything we need to know about this team in the opener.
Right.
It's still the first game. And that's true either way. I mean, if Notre Dame goes out and beat A&M by 30, that's a huge win. It's a perception win. It's a big win, but it doesn't mean that that's what Notre Dame is going to be when they play Louisville. It doesn't mean that that's what Notre Dame is going to be when they play Florida State. I mean, we've seen those games before, Vince. I mean, we watched Notre Dame go out there and beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns when they were a top 5 team 2 years ago. That was 3 weeks after they lost at home to Stanford, who hadn't beaten an FBS team in over a calendar year. Right? But it does give you a taste, in my opinion, of where you are. And that's big, the big thing for me. And for Riley Leonard, one of the big things for him is, can he make the big throws in those big games?
Sure.
That's going to be a question. I'm not as concerned about that in the opener, because throwing the ball down the field requires a level of timing that takes time to work on. He may miss some shots then, but at some point soon, he's going to have to start figuring out, hey, can they get here? Can they get here? Can they get here? Can they get here?
Right.
Those are things that are going to have to be factors. And then, of course, as we talked about, Vince, when you talk about it, it's what does it all lead to? It's what you said. It's, can you do it when it matters most? And can you do it consistently when it matters most? Can you put all it together
right
when it matters most? And there's no way for us to know that answer till November.
Right.
Yeah, like, because again, 100%. If they do it against Texas A&M, that's great.
That's great.
What if they don't do it against Louisville again?
Right. Exactly.
What if they do it against Louisville, but then don't do it against Florida State and USC? What if they do it against Florida State and USC, but then, when they get in the postseason, they don't do it in the first round of the playoff? Or, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to have to be more consistent. And we won't really know until we see them play multiple good teams next year. Because, I mean, dude, if you go back and listen to some of our shows in September last year, and there's and look at our chats, there's people talking about, why is Hartman not getting more Heisman Trophy love? I mean, seriously, and yeah. I'm okay, and it wasn't nuts to say that, because again, I mean, you're the starting quarterback at Notre Dame,
and you're putting up good numbers.
You're putting up huge numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, he put up 254 in the opener. He put up 194 in game 2 because he only played a half. He completed 82.4% of his passes. He went for 286 against Central NC State on the road in a 45-24 win over a ranked team, and then threw for 330 yards against Central Michigan. Dude had 13 passing touchdowns and had 2 rushing touchdowns, so 15 touchdowns in 4 games.
Right.
look great, and then it kind of just
Then it didn't.
So it's we're gonna get little, there's gonna be certain gauges along the way.
Oh yeah, milestones for sure.
That's a much better way of saying it.
Yeah.
It's milestones. You say, okay, yeah, you passed that one, and you're doing this. That's good.
Right.
But now it's what comes next. So if Riley Leonard comes out in the first 4 games and he's lighting the world on fire, it's like, all right, that's great. But is it any different than Sam Hartman doing that last year? Is Texas A&M that much better than what NC State was last year? We don't know the answer to that. They weren't last year.
Right.
And say, yeah, but they got freaky athletes. And they don't know. Texas A&M isn't anybody's freakier of an athlete than what Peyton Wilson was at NC State.
Oh, that linebacker?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no kidding.
So I mean, those are different things you look at and say, okay, let's see what he can do. So yeah, first month is great, but it's like, okay, but you've got to keep it rolling, man, because we could go back at different periods of time. That 2017 offense from the Michigan State game, actually, it was from the second half of the BC game until the Wake Forest game, was one of the best stretches of offense I've ever seen at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And they were averaging over 45 points a game, Vince, and they were running for 300 some yards a game. I mean, they were absolutely ripping people up. Do you remember that stretch? They scored 49 against BC, 38 against Michigan State, 52 against Miami of Ohio, 33 on the road against North Carolina with your backup quarterback, 49 in a game over a highly ranked USC team, 35 against North Carolina State in a 21-point win, and then 48 against NC State. And offensively, you're in that stretch from BC to Wake Forest, their lowest rushing yardage game in that period of time was 182 yards, was their lowest rushing a total. The next lowest was 318. And that 182 yards rushing was against Michigan State, who that year the number 2 rush defense in all of college football. I think they gave up like 70-something yards rushing that year. I mean, it was absolutely nuts how good that, how highly ranked that Michigan State rush defense was. And there's only 2 teams could run the ball on them all year. Notre Dame and Ohio State. That's it. Michigan State gave up 95 yards rushing that season. Notre Dame almost doubled that, and did that with Josh Adams, Dexter Williams missing over a chunk of that game because they got hurt, and Tony Jones missed the entire game. They played the last quarter and a half of that game with Deion McIntosh at running back, and they still couldn't stop him. But then what happened? Miami came, and then that team was never the same.
Right.
So
no doubt.
It's not about do you do it in stretches. It's can you be that team all the time?
Absolutely.
All the time. That's the key.
Bryan, that's going to do it for this part of our talk, the offensive side of the ball and the pass game and all of that fun stuff. And so before we move on to the next part, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com for all of the breaking news and excitement that there is around Notre Dame football. You will not be disappointed.
So Vince, for this next segment, a little bit of a change. We're gonna talk about the same topic, but we're gonna condense it a little bit.
Okay.
Just because of how long that last segment went, and
it's offense. We're always gonna go long talking offense.
No, but it's also because it's a question mark.
Yeah, no, I get it.
And we don't need to spend an hour talking about can the defensive secondary, or the pass defense, which was great last year, still be great this year. So what we're gonna do here, Vince, people are getting a little bit of a live look at a staff meeting, basically, between you and I.
Right.
We'll focus on the big picture aspect and just kind of talk about the things that need to happen for this secondary to be as good as it was last year, especially on the bigger stages and some of the players that will factor into that. So that'll be kind of the way that we go with that one.
Beautiful.
Sound good?
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Bryan, let's jump into the defense and the pass game defense, right? And this has been a strength for Notre Dame over the last at least the last year, if not more than that. They were elite. I'm just going to say it. They were elite in 2023. They have 2 very elite pieces coming back, in the secondary. They should be in that neighborhood, in the discussion for elite again, depending on what that looks like. And then you add in, okay, they've got one of the best defensive tackle tandems in the country. They've got some talent on the outside, still some question marks there, but talent on the outside, and then a young, athletic group of linebackers that we think they can get after the quarterback as well. And so, can this group do what they did last year with some new pieces and some new parts and some new faces? And can they be that dominant group once again against the pass game? I mean, that's what this is really all about. I feel pretty good about it. I'm not going to lie. This is a pretty good group coming back this year.
Well, and the thing that's going to be different this year, that's a little bit to last year's secondary outside of the Ohio State game never got tested in the way that they will to win a title this year. Here's what I mean by that.
Okay.
They didn't get tested against USC the way that normally you'd get tested because of how dominant the D-line was. That's not always going to be the case.
Sure.
And then what I also mean is after the USC game, there was nobody left on the schedule that was really going to threaten them.
Sure.
With a pass game that you had to be worried about. Maybe Oregon State might have.
But they weren't full strength.
Well, and Silas Bolden had a couple nice plays early, and then he got hurt.
Right.
And they didn't have Anthony Gould in that game. DJ Uyunglele didn't play in that game. Damian Martinez didn't play in that game. So, I mean, you can't evaluate that. They weren't tested in that regard. And in Notre Dame wasn't at full strength either. They didn't have Cam Hart.
I mean, it was two different teams.
They didn't have Maris Leofow. They didn't have. I mean, you know what I mean. So it's like you just really can't. You can't. Now it's like, okay, yeah, they were great, but can they be great on the big stage? And like to me, during the regular season, I was more impressed with Notre Dame's pass defense than I was with Michigan's. But here's the thing about Michigan's pass defense, though. They didn't just do that in the regular season. They only gave up 120 passing yards to Iowa in the Big Ten title game, 3.8 yards per play. Okay, so what? Iowa stinks. Me, you, Andrew Gilmore, Michael Campbell, Tommy Guns, D-Rock Irish, Greg Lisman, Jim Halloran, Michael Parks, and two or three more people could probably hold Iowa's pass offense to under 200 yards last year. I'm being sarcastic, but like it's one of the worst passing offenses I've seen in my life, and it was embarrassing. Okay, fine. Then they went and played Alabama in the playoff and held Alabama to 116 yards passing and 5.0 yards per play. Yeah, Jalen Milroe. Okay, cool. Next championship game, they had to play Washington and Michael Penix and Roma Dunze and Jalen McMillan and Jalen Polk. All three of those receivers are drafted, I think, in the third round or higher. Michael Penix was a top 10 NFL draft pick. They threw for 255 yards on 51 attempts. Michael Penix passed for completed 52.9% of his passes. Only averaged 5.0 yards per attempt, threw one touchdown, and had 2 picks. Right? Okay, so they did it every game. And Notre Dame never got that level of test. So then the question is, okay, could they be as good on that stage? And then here's the other thing. As good as the secondary was against Ohio State for that entire game, when the game was on the line, they had 3 big mistakes or misses. They gave up a 4th and 7 completion where they allowed Julian Fleming to beat their nickel across the field. They dropped an interception that would have ended the game. And they had a poor safety coverage on a 3rd and 19 that allowed to set up the game-winning touchdown. So as good as it was, when the game was on the line, they didn't get it done. I mean, that's what you're judged by at Notre Dame, right?
Absolutely.
And in Michigan, who actually gave up more yards against Ohio State, passing the football, Michigan's pass defense gave up 271 yards to Ohio State, Vince, last year. 271. Notre Dame only gave up 240. Michigan gave up 9.0 yards per pass attempt against Ohio State. Notre Dame only gave up 6.3. But in the fourth quarter, when it was a competitive game, they picked off Kyle McCord and put that game away.
Yep.
Notre Dame didn't.
Yep, exactly. They had the opportunity.
What matters.
Had the opportunity and didn't do it.
That's ultimately what matters.
Sure.
And so even as good as it was, is there another level to get to for the pass?
Sure.
I'm not talking secondary. I'm talking pass defense, because Not all the issues, again, that Ohio State fourth quarter were the secondary not doing their job. It was clearly a big part of it, but they didn't get a whole lot of pressure on Kyle McCord on a couple of those snaps either.
He got to sit back there and kind of pick apart.
He got to sit back snap on those plays that hit. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Now they got to 4th and 7 partly because they pressured him on earlier downs.
Sure,
but on those money downs, they didn't get the job done. And that's the question that this defense is going to have to answer, Vince. And we spent a lot of time yesterday talking about the secondary.
Right.
We don't have to, rehash that. Part of the reason for optimism is you do return 2 stars. You've got a lot of young talent and all that kind of stuff. But there's also some concerns that you have that you say, okay, if these don't get answered, I don't know if, can this team they're going to be a very good pass defense again this year, Vince. No doubt about that.
They will be.
But will they be elite and will they be championship caliber? That's the question.
Right.
And so to answer that, we got to look at some of those concerns and talk about the players that got to really step up.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, we're going to talk about let's talk about some of those concerns right now, Brian, and we'll talk about, we did touch on this yesterday, but is field corner going to be a nice complement to what Benjamin Morrison is doing on the other side, right? And there's a heck of a battle between 2 really good players going on right now. I feel good about that position. I do, but it's still a question mark because neither one of those guys has been asked on a consistent basis to be the starter and to be the dude on that side of the football. I mean, they had a start. They each had a start, I think once last year, came in on a rotational basis, things like that. But as you and I have discussed on numerous occasions, it's a lot easier to come in for a spot start or to be a rotational player than it is to be the starter, be the guy, be the dude, right? And so whoever it is going to get tested, right? Because everybody is going to have number 20 circled on their report, right? I mean, on your game plan, they're all going to have 20 circled and they're all going to have 0 circled. Yep. Yes, exactly. And so whoever's on the other side is going to get tested. And so what's your grade on that test? That's the question.
Here's an interesting aspect of that, Vince, is you've got 2 stars coming back, but they're on opposite sides of the field.
Which I have noticed before.
Kind of interesting. Yeah. It's like, and how does that impact things?
Sure.
What do you do? Because it'd be one thing if Xavier was the boundary safety. And you're like, okay, you got Xavier and Benjamin over here.
We're not going over there. Just
or if they're both to the field, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay, we're just gonna figure out what we can do to attack the boundary.
Exactly.
So you look at it that way, Vince, and it is kind of interesting because it's not quite as easy to avoid
talent to avoid the superstars.
It's not quite as easy.
Yeah,
but it can be done. Good coaches will do it. Steve Sarkisian will figure out how to attack your non-stars.
Sure.
And he'll find ways to put your stars in position to be successful. And heck, even somewhat okay coaches can do it. I was never a big fan of the offensive coaching staff at Clemson. The 2-man combination of Tony Elliott and Jeff Scott. They had great talent, but they weren't like great coordinators. But they were smart enough to know, hey guys, 27's out. Let's go at that guy. You know what I mean? Hey, I don't see Julian Love on the field. Him and Troy Pride have been locking us down all game. Let's try to do something here. And that's exactly what they did. And good coaches are, good coach. Like Kalen DeBoer, if Notre Dame has to play Alabama in the postseason, I promise he's going to be able to find ways to attack the positions that aren't being manned by Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison, especially when those guys aren't on the field.
Sure.
Because they're getting breathers. So you're going to have to play well in those other positions. And the field cornerback position especially is going to be a big one because teams are going to go at that position early and often, in my opinion, and try to find ways to beat them one-on-ones. I mean, I guarantee you that that Texas A&M, if they're smart, and I think Colin Klein is, when he sees number 7 at cornerback, he's going to say, we're going to run some double moves and some post-snap switches because this guy's super aggressive,
yeah.
And he's not a burner. And if we can get him to bite, we can get it over top of him. I would. That's absolutely what I would do.
Sure.
And if I would do it, you don't think Colin Klein's going to have some answers for that? You know what I mean? He's a pretty good offensive coordinator. Did a really nice job at Kansas State. That's the reason Marcus Freeman interviewed him for the OC job at Notre Dame when Tommy Rees left, So that's going to be a big thing. And then obviously Christian Gray's got all the talent in the world, Vince, but can he put it together and be that guy?
Exactly.
I don't know the answer to that question.
Right. We think we have a good idea of
love
where
the
it's
talent.
headed. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Love the talent. But
right.
Look, a lot of this stuff, Vince, is, we're 23 days from the opener. This is about, okay, yeah, the talent's there, guys. I love the roster, but it's show me time. We're in show me mode now. And I think
100%.
Christian Gray's got all the talent in the world. Benjamin Morrison had all the talent in the world, but am I right about him? Like, I thought I was right about him, but we didn't really know till he got into the season and proved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I look like a genius. You know what I mean?
We'll
nice ignore the guys that I thought were going to be good that didn't turn out to be good, or the guys that I didn't think were going to be good that turned out to be good. We're going to focus on this one that I got right. Okay.
Right. Exactly. 100%.
But the point is, you got to go out and show it.
Yeah.
Love the talent. You got to go out and show it. We thought last summer, you and I talked to Xavier Watts, breakout player. He can be a star, all that kind of stuff. Got to show it. And he did. And a lot of guys on defense did. But offensively, they didn't show it. I mean, we think Sam Hartman's could be really, really good here with the, freshman class is going to help. I think Jaden Thomas is ready to take off. Tobias Merriweather was one of my breakout players last year. Very good about him. All these type of guys. And guess what? They didn't step up and pan out. Somebody in the chat said, Brian, you were wrong on Caden Madden. No, I wasn't. I don't know what crack you're smoking, but I did not think Caden Madden was going to be very good, and he wasn't. So I don't know what is being talked about there, but
I was definitely right, by the way.
Yeah. I don't know what that dude's smoking.
Which then I was so right on Caden Madden that it made me wrong.
He did just say he was trolling me. So okay. I was like, okay, good save, the Shark 83. Good save.
But I was so right on Caden Madden that it made me wrong on Marshall later. That was the problem. That was the problem.
Yes. But the point is, Vince, there's talent there, but is it going to play to the expectations? And will it play to expectations in the big moments? Those are things that we're going to have to find out. Right. So I wouldn't say it's a concern. It's a question. And a question isn't always a negative. A question can simply be a lack of evidence.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. And, speaking of a lack of evidence with this linebacking core and, everything that we think they are and what they can be and all of the things. And, just, hey, go back and listen to our linebacker show. Okay. But
2 days ago.
Yeah, exactly. Just go take a listen because we really broke down what we think the linebackers can do and all of those things. But in this particular conversation, the linebackers are going to be an important piece, not only at times in the pass rush, but then also in pass coverage. And to be honest with you, Notre Dame hasn't been fantastic at the linebacker position in pass coverage over the last few years. I think they've gotten more athletic, and I think they're going to be a little bit better than that this year.
Last year, they were at least better at rushing the quarterback.
Right.
Which helped. They still weren't good in coverage. They weren't bad, but they weren't
great.
Good.
Yeah, right.
And part of that's length. And and Drake Bowen just hasn't been asked to do that a whole lot in his career. So the question about linebacker in the pass game is twofold, Vince. It's will they be able to rush the quarterback as effectively or hopefully better than last year's linebackers? It's question number one. But at the same time, question number two is you can't always blitz. You're going to have to drop in coverage at times.
Yes.
And can they handle that? Are they going to, like last year, great point, Vince, was, they weren't great in coverage, but they never gave up that uncovered wheel route. And teams tried it. They never gave up that uncovered seam route. Teams tried it, but they were at least where they needed to be to where it was, you were going to have to make a good throw to beat them. And so that was good. They did their job. They didn't always do it great, but they did their job. And how good everything else was, it was kind of, can this group do that?
Right.
Can they do that? Can they be effective rushing the quarterback? Can they handle coverage? Can they, not have blown assignments? Those are going to be questions that, again, just like corner, Vince, it's not a talent question. I have zero questions about the talent of Drake Bowen and Kingston Villama'asa and Jalen Sneed and Jaden Alsbury and Jack Kaiser. Zero questions about their physical gifts.
Sure.
I have questions about their experience. And even Jack Kaiser experienced playing the position he's going to play now. To where are they going to be able to consistently get the job done and get the job done when it matters most? Those are legitimate questions you have to answer.
Yeah.
Right. Tools are there, but
absolutely.
Right. Can they
still got to
put
see it? Got to see it. And the final piece of the puzzle in the quote unquote concerns area or question marks that need to be answered is, can they get a consistent pass rush from the front four and the defensive line? And can they take that to another level? Because look, we've had questions about Viper. Obviously, you know, we have brand new defensive ends. You know, you're getting your defensive tackles back, but I would love for them to be even a little bit more disruptive in the pass game than they were in, you know, before. And so it's still a question mark as a whole. Can this defensive line, with their depth and everything else they've got going on, get some pressure on the quarterback as well? And that will obviously affect the pass game defensively.
You know, it's such an underrated part of it, but I remember watching the Broncos in 2015 and watching the Super Bowl against Cam Newton. And you're thinking like, well, I don't know how this is going to go. How this game's going to go. Because you got this great defense against this great offense, talented quarterback, throwing for a lot of yards, rushing for a lot of yards, scoring a lot of points. And Denver's offense is just a hot mess. I mean, you know, because Peyton couldn't throw the ball really anymore, and you know, it just wasn't a great situation. If you can't stop Cam, this could be a problem. You know, this could be a problem. I mean, Vince, this is a team that in the postseason that year, the Panthers, who finished 17-1 before the Super Bowl, won their first playoff game 31-24. And won the NFC Championship game 49-15. I mean, they were ripping people up,
man.
You know, they scored at least 31 points in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of their last 9 games, they scored at least 31 points. In the NFL, that's a lot of scoring.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so in one of those games was late in the year against Atlanta. In a game that, if I remember correctly, that they had already clinched home field and it just didn't matter a ton. But you got to stop this Cam Newton guy. And how do you do that? Well, Denver showed you how to do that. And Cam Newton was never the same player after that. It was, you got to pressure him from everywhere. From everywhere. You got to be able to get after the quarterback. And so when the game mattered most, and they did the same thing. Denver's defense did the same thing in the NFC or in the AFC playoffs that year, Vince, to Tom Brady. They confused the heck out of Tom Brady. I mean, if you think about that Broncos team that year, Vince, to win a Super Bowl, the Broncos had to beat Ben Roethlisberger, Tom Brady, and in his prime, Cam Newton. And they held those teams to 16, 18, and 10 points. Why? At a phenomenal pass rush.
Yeah.
And that allowed their really good corners to play aggressively and stop those teams. A big pass rush can be that neutralizer to a team that maybe has more skill talent than you have. And what we don't know is, can this team do that? And last year's defense could not always do that. As good as it was, Vince, they couldn't get to the quarterback on the downs that mattered most against the Buckeyes. They couldn't get Caleb Williams to the ground in 2022. They did in 2023 and made him. I mean, like, no, Caleb Williams' entire, how he is viewed by fans, in my opinion, was completely changed that night. It was always, he's great on a bad team. But after that night, it was like, okay, what did I just watch? That guy, maybe he's not as good as people think. And he is very, very, very good. But Notre Dame not only made him look human, they made him look awful.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it just, you've got to be second half against Ohio State in 2022. I mean, they made C.J. Stroud work for so much of what he did. But the fact is they couldn't get to him in the second half enough, and he was able to make some throws to win that game.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't have to throw for 400 yards. He only threw for like 230 something that game.
But he showed his
was able
mettle,
to
man.
Exactly. He showed himself to be a guy that can make money throws in that game.
Yeah.
And, they couldn't get him to the ground. He had some scrambles where he got out of the pocket and made throws because they couldn't get to him.
Yeah.
So, yes, in those moments, you have to be able to get to the quarterback. And, again, look at the last 2 years against USC. 2022, couldn't bring Caleb down. Coverage is actually pretty good that game. Couldn't bring Caleb down. Couldn't contain him. He goes off. You lose the game despite throwing for a bunch of yards and moving the ball. Year 2, you blow them out. Why? What was the big difference? Caleb couldn't. I mean, you were just in his face the whole night long.
He was seeing ghosts
the whole night long
by the end of the night. There's no doubt about
those ghosts were dudes in his face.
But you know what I mean? Like, I mean, there was
George there.
They were coming from all directions, and he just didn't even know what to do with himself. And he was throwing the ball before he even got pressure at times because he was so afraid of the pressure that he had been receiving all night long. You know what I mean? And so he's throwing off his back foot. It was glorious to watch until the Bears drafted him.
But can they do that on the bigger stage against good teams?
Right, absolutely.
And good lines. And it doesn't have to be, he had 8 sacks in the title game against Ohio State. No, it's like, but can you make the pressures when they matter? Can you, that's what comes down to making those big stops. Yeah, we struggled all night long. I mean, look, I grew up in the 80s and 90s when some of the best pass rushers ever played the game played. And, you wouldn't hear Lawrence Taylor's name a whole game, but in the fourth quarter when the game was on the line, sorry, LT's is going to do it.
Yeah.
Bruce Smith was that way. Reggie White was that way.
White, yeah.
As a Broncos fan, I've seen some of those, Neil Smith, Alfred Williams on those 97, 98 teams. That Broncos team gave up a lot of yards to Brett Favre, but what were they able to do? They were able to get some pressures on him that forced turnovers early in the game, allowed you to pull away. They were able to get pressure on him on that last fourth down to force him to, he's got to throw off his back foot, allows John Mobley to break up the pass because it was off target. Why? Because there was pressure in his face to throw off his back foot. So even though he made some money throws and big time throws and had some, outplayed Elway in that game statistically, the difference is when the Broncos needed a drive, they couldn't get to Elway, and he made the plays, and Terrell Davis made the plays. When the Packers needed a drive, they couldn't protect the quarterback, and the Broncos won that football game. Right? I mean, so that's what we're talking about is when it matters, can you do it? And I could list a whole bunch of pass rushers that you and I grew up watching, man, but they made those – they got to the quarterback when they needed to get to the quarterback. I mean, when it mattered most, you've got those guys to get to the quarterback. Von Miller was that way when he was in his prime with the Broncos. And him and DeMarcus Ware, that's what made that team so good is they could just – when they needed a pressure, they could get the pressure. And I even think the first big pressure for Denver in that game, Von Miller brought it, but I think Malik Jackson's the one that recovered the fumble in the end zone for the Broncos. So that's going to be a big key is can you pressure the quarterback when it matters most? And that's something this defense is going to have to prove that it can do. Because I don't know that they did that last year. I don't think that they did, honestly. And they weren't able to make those stops, and they needed to make those stops in the biggest games.
Yeah.
I don't think it's entirely their fault, because again, you held Louisville to 7 points in the first half. Your offense should have pulled away by then.
Should have.
But they didn't. And your offense should have scored more than 14 points against against Ohio State. That's not your fault. But on that last drive, you had your chances and you couldn't make the plays.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to show that.
Before we exit the defensive talk on pass defense, let's quickly go over some guys that are going to be key to the success of the pass defense this year in 2024. And we do have a few guys that we want to highlight. And so let's go over those guys right now, Brian, and we'll lead it off with the Viper position, which, we've talked about the Viper position a lot, obviously, and the question marks that are there. But when we're talking about pass rush, Viper is going to be very important, not only for getting hands on the quarterback and pressures and all of those things, but also at times dropping into coverage and doing a decent job in that. Now, it's not going to be all the time, obviously, but when that does happen, they can't be a liability out there either. Right. And so, we're talking about Botelho and Traore, Boubacar, and what that looks like at the Viper position. Can those guys contribute to the defense? You made a great point the other day when we were talking about the defensive line and how great the defensive line was with zero help from the Viper position.
None.
Zero. So Can they at least contribute in a positive way to the defensive line and then obviously overall to the pass defense as well?
They have to get production from that position this year, Vince.
Yeah.
I mean, do they need it to make the playoff? No, I don't think so. They can get to the college football playoff without the Vipers being much better than last year, but they're not going to go anywhere meaningful once they get there.
Exactly.
You know, you're not going to beat Georgia if that position still gives you nothing. You're not going to beat Ohio State if that position gives you nothing. You're not going to beat Texas if that position gives you nothing. You know, it's just the reality of it. And you know, but it really comes down to Patelho and his veteran presence, and Boubacar and his elite potential. You need them both to kind of help you out this year. And I don't care if neither of them has more than 4.5 individual sacks, as long as they both have at least 4 individual sacks. You know what I mean? And like, you know, it's about the tandem. Maybe one game it's Patelho. Maybe the next game it's Boubacar. And then the other part too, Vince, which is not discussed about a ton, is teams like to run the ball into the boundary. And they're the force play. They're the support force, whatever the call is, depending on what the call is. But they're those guys that are the edge stoppers, need to be the edge stoppers when you're running into the boundary. And so it impacts that as well. But when you look at the pass rushing aspect of it, which is what this part of the show is about, they've got to give more pressure, got to give more consistent pressure. Those two kids, to me, Jordan Patelho and Boubacar Traore, could ultimately be what determine whether or not Notre Dame has an elite championship caliber D-line this year. It's going to be very good.
Right.
It's like we talked about yesterday. They're in the top 10. Minimum, they're 6 to 10, somewhere in there. But to be a team to be a unit that fuels look, they could be 10th and win a championship if the rest of the team is good enough. I'm saying to be good enough to drive a championship, they need to be top 5.
Sure.
To be top 5 and to get into that top 3, this position has to be way better than it was last year statistically, but then also from a clutch standpoint. I mean, like, look, why do I always talk about Khalid Kareem? Was Khalid Kareem as productive of a pass rusher as Julian Okwara? Nope, not close. But you can remember every sack Khalid Kareem made, because it seemed like every sack he ever made was a clutch moment. You know, that's why you remember Khalid Kareem. That's why he was such an important part of that team, is because he was going to sack, a tackle for loss, a forced fumble, a pressure, something. When the game was on the line, you just kind of felt like, don't worry, 53's at it, got it. You know, Lohi Gilman had a lot of that to him. But that's the thing, is these guys are going to have to give you that, Vince. Have to. If this team's going to compete for a championship.
Right. The next guy that we had on our list is a guy we talked about a bunch actually earlier on in the show, but I definitely want to bring him up because he is extremely important. It's Mr. Gray at corner, right? And he's going to be extremely important, obviously, to the pass defense, because he's going to get picked on, I would think, a lot.
Him and Jade Mickey both.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, we have to bring him up. Again, we talked about him a bunch earlier, but he's still a very, very important piece. We think he is going to end up starting there. And even if he doesn't, that position is going to be extremely important. But yeah, I have a lot of confidence, but again, we need to see it. And he's going to be extremely important to the success of the pass defense for sure.
The reason I put him here alone and not him and Mickey is because Gray is the one guy of that group that has a chance to be a star caliber player.
Sure.
Right. He's the guy that has a chance to kind of not just be hold your water type of player, but to be a difference maker. And what made the cornerback tandem last year was so good is not because Cam Hart was really, really good. And it's not because that Benjamin Morrison was really good. It's that Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison were both really, really good.
Right.
And that's much better than, you know, like I think that's something that hurt Ohio State at times last year when their defense got in trouble. And it is because teams could avoid Denzel Burke and have success.
Yeah.
And last year's like, okay, if you're not going to go at Benjamin Morrison, who do you go at? Cam Hart, Xavier Watts? Like, your options are kind of limited here. And they need him to step up. And I'm not saying he has to be Cam Hart, but he has to be pretty good. They need him to grow up fast. They need Christian Gray to grow up in a hurry as a player.
I think he will, but we still have to see it happen, obviously. So the final guy is also in the secondary. He's a transfer student. The importance of this particular position has been, I mean, the level of importance of this position has increased over the last, half decade, obviously with the transformation of offenses and things like that. But it has been a very, very good position for Notre Dame the past 2 years prior to this year. And now you have Jordan Clark coming in and assuming that nickel position, which is extremely important. I mean, extremely important. And can he kind of take the baton from the last couple of guys that have manned the corner or the nickel position and then just take it and make it his own and be as successful?
I'm glad you said that, Vince, because that is where my heart was on this, putting him on this
Nice.
one. Was my heart was there, but my head was also there. So it was both of them. And what I mean heart, I mean like the spirit of why he's on there.
Right.
And the spirit of why he's on there is twofold. The first being, this has been a strength for Notre Dame the last 2 years.
Yep.
Tariq Bracy was very good at this position 2 years ago, and Thomas Harper was very good at this position last year. Can Jordan Clark match that?
Mm-hmm.
But then practically speaking, this is the second part of why he's on this list. Well, we're going to answer the question that we've been asking the last several shows, right? Today and then on Monday when we talk DBs. Well, you can't go at Benjamin Morrison and we think Christian Gray is going to be a stud and Xavier Watts is an All-American and Rod Hurd's pretty flipping good. And, well, what are you going to do? Okay, you're going to go with the linebackers and you're going to go with the nickel. Because of the 5 guys we anticipate starting, I would argue that Jordan Clark is the least talented.
Okay.
Now, he's smart.
Sure.
He brings a lot of value. And this doesn't mean he lacks talent. But when you're as good as Notre Dame is in the secondary, it's like we talked about, somebody's got to be last. Somebody's got to be the least athletic. You're not all the same. And I would say he's the least talented of the group. Doesn't mean he's a bad player at all. But if I'm an opposing offensive football team, especially if I have, I'm thinking of some of the bigger games that they play this year, especially if I have Colin Lacey and I've got at Louisville, and especially if I've got Zachariah Branch, I am going to do as much as I can to get Zachariah Branch matched up against Jordan Clark. I got a lot more chance of success doing that than I have of trying to put Zachariah Branch against Benjamin Morrison. I'm just going to do that. And then I'm also, if you're smart, I'm going to try to find some ways to get Deuce Robinson, who's 6'6", matched up against Jordan Clark and go at him that way.
Sure.
Of all the guys on the team, that's the one I'm taking my chances with. Partly because they're also lower percentage passes, slants, ins, overs, crossers, things like that. I'm going to make Jordan Clark beat us if I'm an opposing offensive coach. Now, that's not saying Jordan Clark can't step up to the table, but I'm saying he's going to need to. He's going to have the best season of his career. And the good news for Jordan Clark is he's surrounded by better talent than he's ever played with. He can be a complementary piece, but he's going to have to play well, Vince, because the nickel is such an important – I mean, we talked about this. The nickel's on the field a lot more than the rover is. And so he's going to have to be on the field, especially in big moments. And especially, he's going to definitely be on the field a lot against Texas if they play Texas. He's going to definitely be on the field a lot against Georgia and Ohio State.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
They're going to need those guys in the field a ton.
Yep.
And can he do that? Can he step up and be good in those moments? Because he's going to get picked on.
Sure.
In my opinion, by the better teams in the schedule. I have no doubt about that. Because last year against Ohio State, as good as Jack Kaiser was last year, you know how many snaps Jack Kaiser played against Ohio State? 10.
Really?
10.
I did not know that.
No. Because Thomas Harper played 50.
They were in nickel. Yeah, they were in nickel.
They're in nickel the whole game.
Yeah.
So Jack only played 10 snaps that game.
That's crazy. One of your better linebackers, to be honest with you, only played 10 snaps. And I understand why, but that just blows my mind, to be perfectly honest with you. So
yeah, and I think most of those were like third down type of
snaps. I'm sure they were.
So that's just that, but that's kind of where they were last year with the makeup of this team. Against Riley Leonard, Jack only played 16 snaps. That's it.
But that but that also goes to what I said earlier about the fact that offenses are changing and defenses have to change along with them. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to compete. And this is an incredibly important position in that regard with the evolution of offenses and defenses. So that's why this position is super important.
Right. And so that's why Jordan Clark is a key to success for Notre Dame.
Yeah.
The better he plays, the better this secondary is going to be because teams are going to go after him. And again, this is not to say Jordan Clark's not a good football player. Guys, this is the case on good defenses. When you have the talent Notre Dame has, somebody's got to be last. Somebody's got to be the hey, I can't go at that guy. We got to go with somebody. We can't just, look, we're, A&M's not going to sit there and be like, hey, you know what? I don't think we can beat Notre Dame, so we're just going to forfeit and just get ready for our next game. Look, they're going to come out and play. They're going to go after somebody. Who's that going to be?
Yeah,
and if I'm an offensive coach and I look at all the talent Notre Dame has, that's who I'm going to try to figure out ways to beat their linebackers in the pass game, and I'm going to try to find ways to beat their nickel in the pass game. I'm not sure. Last year, I'd have tried to find ways. How can I get DJ Brown in coverage?
Mm-hmm.
How can I get Ramon Henderson in coverage? How can I get the linebacker? That's who I'm going at last year. I'm not going at Cam Hart. I'm not going at Benjamin Morrison. I'm not going to Xavier Watts. I might have gone at Xavier early. I would have quickly found out that was dumb and gone to somebody else. This year, Jordan Clark in Ohio State said, we're going after Thomas Harper when it matters most. And they beat him 4th and 7. Right? That's how important this position is. Jordan Clark's got to make that play. And so it's not about Jordan Clark only. It's about the nature of that position.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And he just happens to be the one manning it. That's going to do it for our overview on the pass defense and how we think it's going to shape out. Questions, comments, concerns, all that fun stuff. And so thanks for hanging out with us. We've got one more segment to hit, so don't go anywhere. But before we get to that part, make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, that notification bell. Share with your family and friends. And, of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. You won't be sorry. I can promise you that. So boards.irishbreakdown.com. Final part of today's show, Bryan, and it is also the final Power 4 conference that we need to preview. And I have been looking forward to / dreading this particular conference because of frankly, the wide openness. That's probably not a word. It is now the wide openness of the conference. And if you probably polled 20 different analysts talking about the Big 12, you might have 5 or 6 different champions of the Big 12, potentially. I mean, you could make a case for it anyway. And so that's why the reason I would say I was dreading, and of course that's a little tongue in cheek, but coming up with a 1 through 16 for this conference and what you were predicting, what I am predicting is going to be the final for this was daunting, frankly. And it was almost like I covered my eyes a bit and just kind of like picked a couple at random. It felt like at times, to kind of fill in the slots, but we're going to have some fun with this. And so how we do it, if you don't remember how we've done our conference predictions, is we will give you our 1 through 16 and we'll kind of tell you how we're different, how we're similar, things like that. We will talk about some of the top teams and kind of what they bring to the table. And then we'll also talk about teams on the rise, teams that are maybe overrated, coaches on the hot seat, players of the year, which I guarantee we have different, so it's a lot of fun. So we just kind of, take our stab at the Power 4 conferences and we'll see what the outcome is. So without further ado, Bryan, let's jump into the Big 12, the new look Big 12, by the way, which is still incredibly strange to write down some of these names under the moniker of Big 12.
Yeah, the last 2 years.
Right.
They've expanded the last 2 years.
Right. So they brought up a bunch of teams from the group of 5, and then they added some teams from the former Pac-12. And so
because 2 years ago, they added Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU.
Right. Yep.
And then this past offseason, they added Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado. They added Colorado first. So a lot of people forget
that's
Colorado left before a lot of those other teams, like before Oregon and Washington and those teams all took off. Colorado, I think USC and UCLA were first.
Yes.
I think
they were the first
Colorado
ones, yes.
was next.
Yes.
Which Colorado should have never left the Big the Big 12 to begin with, but
Agreed.
That's a different conversation for a different day. So in the last 2 years, you've added 8 teams to this league. Because remember, the Big 12 had 10 teams. Remember that? Used to joke.
Right.
Big 12 only had 10 teams. So that's why for a while there, you had the rematch. It was always a rematch in the Big 12 title game because you had 9 rec conference games, and you know TCU and Texas or Oklahoma had a couple rematches. Texas beat.
You're going to play somebody you already played. I mean,
was it 18? Texas beat Oklahoma in the regular season, and they had a rematch in the title game because you're going to have a rematch in that. And so now, obviously, that's a little bit different, but you've got now 16 teams. You went from 10 to 16, or you went from 10 to 12 to 16,
right?
Essentially. So you went from 10 to 14 to 12 to 16. 12
right.
meaning
and the 12 to 16 was like in the same offseason, basically.
Right.
So yeah,
right. So you have a 16-team league, and Vince, honestly, I could see 5 different teams winning this league.
You're not wrong, man. You're not wrong, and it's wild. It's absolutely wild, and you could make a legitimate case for a lot of these teams. So let's just jump in.
I feel like just saying this, I feel like this is the league I'm going to be the most wrong on. So
right?
what I'm going to do is I think next week I'm going to release my final predictions for each conference on the site and all that type of stuff. And I promise you there'll be some changes to what we had when we did the shows, just because, certain things change,
things have changed,
whatever.
Yeah.
But this one, you're like, well, this shouldn't change. You're doing it next week. You did it today. It'll change.
It could change later this afternoon.
I'm already wanting to change some of my predictions that I did before the show started. So yeah, you
reserve that right. It is your show. So,
but still, though, man, it's like, dude, it's just tough.
Yeah,
because I'm not going to do it now. Because if I did it now, then I'm going to change my opinion by the middle of the show, and then we're going to talk about the Big 12 for 3 hours because we keep changing our opinion. Like, okay, what if you guys actually settle on your predictions? Okay, so I'm going to stick to where I am now, but we're going to have some fun with it. So why don't you start off with your 16-1, and then I'll give my 16-1, and then we can kind of. Talk about some of those top teams and who we think there are the real title, like who really are the title contenders in the Big 12,
right?
And why.
All right, here we go. 16-1. So starting at the bottom, working my way up. I've got Cincinnati 16. I've got Houston 15. Arizona State 14. BYU 13. The Fighting Coach Primes at 12. Colorado. Baylor at 11. At 10, Texas Tech. At 9, UCF. At 8, TCU, the battle of the acronyms. At 7, West Virginia. At 6, Iowa State. At 5, Arizona. At 4, Kansas State. At 3, Kansas. My top 2 teams, in theory, facing off in the Big 12 championship, Oklahoma State at 2 and Utah at 1.
I believe in every other league, you and I had the same teams playing in the title games, correct?
Some of them were flipped
winners.
Or whatever, different winners.
We both had Florida State and Clemson.
Yes.
We both had Ohio State and Oregon. And we have the same teams in the SEC? I don't remember.
I honestly can't remember, to be
but
honest with you.
But I thought we did. This one we've got one that's the same,
right?
And you said Oklahoma State and
Utah.
Yep. So here's mine: 16 Arizona State, 15 Cincinnati, 14 Baylor, 13 Houston, 12 Colorado, 11 BYU, 10 West Virginia, 9 UCF, 8 Kansas, 7 Texas Tech, 6 Arizona, 5 Iowa State, 4 TCU, 3 Utah, 2 Oklahoma State, and 1 Kansas State. So I feel like looking at the schedules, there's a chance that the 1 and 2 are flipped, but I have Kansas State winning the conference championship. Like when it's all said and done, I think Kansas State is going to be the team that represents the Big 12 in the college football playoff.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where I went with it. And part of it, Vince, is the schedule. They get Oklahoma State at home, they get Arizona at home, they get Kansas at home. Now they have a couple tough road games, but like you're playing most of the good teams at home, and they don't play Utah. Kansas State doesn't play Utah.
Gotcha.
In the regular season. So you had Utah and Oklahoma State, right? Was your two?
Yep.
Who'd you have winning it?
Utah. It's probably more reputation and things like that than anything else. I just love the toughness of Utah and what they bring to the table. And I just don't know if a lot of the Big 12 teams have seen that enough, potentially. I mean, I like Oklahoma State. I like Kansas. I like Kansas State. Like those four, you could convince me pretty much any other way. Those four, I could jostle around and be cool with it. I like Utah. I also think that they, for the most part, are veteran laden. I think that, I just like their toughness up front. And I'm a big O-line, D-line guy. And I think that that's kind of their MO. And I like that. So that's kind of the reason I put Utah at the top. I just think that style of play plays off well also at the end of the season. And granted, they're going to be playing the Big 12 championship, I believe, in Dallas. And so, weather's not going to come into play, but still, I just like the toughness of Utah, man. I can't shake it, Brian. I can't shake it.
I get that hype about Utah, and they get Cameron Rising back and all that.
I'm not a huge Cam Rising fan. I will say that.
But he's important for them, though.
Exactly. That's my point. I didn't want him at Notre Dame, for example. There was a lot of people crying for that. I did not want that. But I think he fits what they're doing very well. So I'm not saying he's going to be great like at the NFL level, but at Utah, he fits. So, yeah.
Where I would disagree with you a little bit is on their style being unique in the Big 12. And I would say in the past, very accurate. But some of the hires in that league recently have kind of changed the Big 12 a little bit. And that's kind of, when I look at Chris Kleiman, who came from North Dakota State, they run the football. Right. I mean, they're good running a football team. And now with Avery Johnson at quarterback, they're going to run the ball even more. Vince, you had 5 teams in the Big 12 last year that ran for over 200 yards a game. Kansas State, Kansas, UCF, Cincinnati, and West Virginia. And then Texas was at 188. Oklahoma was 182. You had 7 teams that ran for over 180 yards last year. And I think this league is got a little bit more of that. I don't know that any of them are as big as Utah is defensively, but I think there's more of that, in my opinion, than there maybe has been in the past in that league. And when you look at like some of the other, the top conferences and things like that, even leagues where they have people that run the ball, they run the ball, a little less traditionally, like, maybe more spread or up tempo or whatever. But like I said, when you look at the Big 12, as I pointed out, you had 5 teams that ran for over 200 yards rushing per game. You want to get a little factoid, Vince, you're going to find interesting. The other Power 5 conferences, the other 4, the Big 10, the ACC, the Pac-12, and the SEC, combined had 3 teams rush for over 200 yards last year. Combined. Big 12 had 5. So the league has changed. You know what I mean? The league has changed a little bit. It's not that soft. Everybody plays, the air raid like it was when Art Briles was there, and you had, him going against Dana Holgerson, and you know what I mean? It's like you just added Willie Fritz to the league. How did Tulane win? Running the ball. So it's a little bit of a different league. Iowa State's a team that plays with some physicality. And let's not forget who won the Doak Walker Award last year. Vince is the nation's best running back. He's from the Big 12. Right? Ollie Gordon from Oklahoma State. So that's why I'm not thinking that Utah is going to be as good maybe as some people think that they're going to be in that league. I think what you said about them worked great for them in the Big 12 or in the Pac-12.
Sure.
It was great for them in the Pac-12.
Muscled the crap out of people.
Because they did it, what Kyle Whittingham did the last 3 years in the Big 12 prior to the injuries, what Jim Harbaugh did when he first got to Stanford, this is a fast-paced athletes league. We are going to run it down your freaking throat and play. You're not going to be able to recruit to stop us because you have to recruit to stop everybody else.
Yep.
And we're going to be so different. So that's my thing on Utah, but I get where you're coming from. I look at Oklahoma State and I look at Kansas State, especially. Kansas State's going to have speed this year. their quarterback's going to be one of the more dynamic quarterbacks in college football. You remember Avery Johnson. You and I have talked about him on the show before. He was a guy that obviously Notre Dame recruited coming out of high school. They got Dylan Edwards transferred in. I don't know if he's going to be a running back. Is he going to be a tailback? They got DJ Giddens coming back. Like, they're going to have some speed. And I really like what Kansas State has come to. They have a lot coming back on defense, and I think Chris Klieman's a heck of a football coach. And as I mentioned, it's the schedule too. The schedule is the final piece of this puzzle to me. Is I think their schedule sets up nicely where Utah has to play at Oklahoma State, at Houston, at Colorado, at UCF. They get TCU at home, they get Arizona at home, so their schedule's not daunting, but I think it is a little tougher than Kansas State's. So we're going to see, Vince, but the thing that I look at it is we both think Utah is going to be pretty good. If you have them first or second, I have them third. We're in the ballpark.
Yeah. Some
that we're very different on is that you and I are on that
the biggest one
different than a lot of other people is Arizona. There's a lot of people in the chat that have Arizona winning it, and you have them fifth, and I have them sixth.
Yeah,
in the league, and I just think Arizona lost too much from last year. I think that yes, you can't look at them like, oh, they're the same team as last year. No, they lost their head coach and their entire coaching staff.
Exactly.
It wasn't like where they promoted the D coordinator. They did a hire from completely outside the program. They lost their running back. They lost a lot of talent. They lost starting offensive linemen to Washington. Like, they're just not the same team. And I know Noah Fafidi's had a great year last year, but he just doesn't do it for me like he does for some others. And I have a lot of this. Well, what is he going to be when the whole league is preparing for him? Because he was an off the bench guy last year.
He was an off the bench guy.
It was early.
It was
but
in September,
Will Howard was that way the year before, and I had doubts about Will Howard last year, and he wasn't as good last year as he was 2 years ago at K-State. So that's kind of where I'm at on Arizona, Vince, and it sounds like we're on the same page on that one.
Mm-hmm. Arizona needs to prove to me that they're not a flash in the pan. I mean, to be honest with you, as a program, and they've got some talent coming back, but a brand new coaching staff, and that's going to be tough. That's going to be really tough to me. And, their first game in conference is against your Kansas State Wildcats, by the way. So, and it's on the road. So that's going to be a tough opening game for them. Now, where I think we're going to learn a little something about Arizona at that point, and we may even learn a little bit something about Kansas State if Arizona somehow manages to win that game. But that's a tough conference opener right there early on in the season. I mean, you're not even halfway through September, and you've got to play your favorite to win the Big 12. So that's going to be important. And then they follow that right up with Utah at Utah. So you've got consecutive games. Now, I believe there's a bye in there, but you've got consecutive games on the road against Kansas State, your champ, and Utah, my champ. Mm-hmm. So that's a tough road to hoe there early on in the season for Arizona. You're going to, especially with a new coaching staff, I think you're going to learn a lot about Arizona real early on before the calendar even flips.
They also have to play at UCF and at TCU and at BYU.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of those games are going to be cakewalks.
Right.
In my opinion.
That's a tough schedule to me.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a tough thing to manage.
I agree.
For Arizona.
I agree. And look, they were good last year. They lost to Washington in a close game. They lost to USC in a close game. They didn't have to play Oregon last year. They didn't have to play, they barely beat Oregon State at home. To me, they just, I don't know if I just felt there was a little bit of smoke and mirrors to what they did last year.
Yeah.
Utah was beat the heck up by the time they played them at the end of the year. This team barely beat Stanford. They lost to not a very good Mississippi State team on the road. I just wasn't blown away with them last year. They weren't a team that really impressed me. And I think them beating Oklahoma the way they did in the bowl game is why a lot of people are kind of fired up about Arizona. I just don't see it. The team that you and I had a big disagreement on, we really don't have a big disagreement on based on the criteria that you're using. And you have Kansas as one of your top teams.
You and I are very different on that one.
I have them 8th.
Yeah.
But if your prediction of player of the year, we'll just say it now, your player of the year prediction is Jalen Daniels, quarterback of Kansas.
Yep.
And I have no problem with it.
Yep.
The problem is, Vince, is here's why I predict them to finish last. I'm not predicting what's going to get injured. I'm simply looking back at history and saying, this guy's never been healthy for an entire season.
Sure.
And that's Jalen Daniels. He played 3 games last year. Now, guess what Kansas's record was in those 3 games he played? 3-0. And he was the year before when Kansas was pretty good. They went 5-1 before he got hurt. Their only loss was a 1 touchdown loss to TCU. He gets hurt, and the rest of the year they go 1-6.
Sure. Oh, he's a huge part of their success.
Guy's never been healthy.
Right.
You know, and even the year before in 2021, he missed games. He missed games in 2020. This kid's never been healthy. And they don't even, like, you know, Jason Bean wasn't a great player, but he was at least athletic enough that you could kind of put him in there and win some games.
Right.
And I also think losing the offensive coordinator is going to sting a little bit as well. The guy they lost to Penn State. So I think Lance Leopold's a phenomenal coach. I just don't know that he's going to be able to have this team be as good as they should be if Jalen Daniels goes down again. And that's the thing that's killed them the last 2 years, Vince, is when he's had that guy at quarterback, they're pretty good. But he just hasn't been able to keep him healthy. So my prediction is also kind of looking at it as if he's going to have to prove to me he can be healthy for an entire season. It's not like looking at like Riley Leonard had an injury and that cost him time. I mean, this is a guy that's been hurt multiple times every year he's played. Every single year he's played, he's missed games with injury. So I have to look at trends and say, well, if you're missing games every year with injury, then you're going to miss some games this year with injury, right? I mean, that's just kind of how I have to look at it. Now, if he's healthy and plays the whole year, then my opinion of Kansas changes a little bit. I also think Kansas got a bit of a challenging schedule. You know, they play at Illinois in the non-conference. Yeah, they got to play at West Virginia. They got to play at Kansas State, at BYU, at Baylor. So like they don't play Oklahoma State. They don't play Utah.
Right.
But with the thought of not having Jalen Daniels, all of a sudden at Baylor becomes a losable game. At BYU becomes a losable game. At West Virginia could be a losable game if he's out for those games. And honestly, at home, Iowa State and some of those teams, like the big thing for me is Iowa State I like a lot this year. And they're not going to be great, but they're going to be a typical Matt Campbell good team. Matt Campbell's teams are good when they're super experienced. And I think they've got something like 19 or 20 starters returning from last year. And I think their schedule sets up relatively well for them to be a top 5 team. They don't have one of the 5 best rosters. They're one of the 5 most experienced teams, and their schedule sets up well. And that's why I have Iowa State on there. 2 teams that I have, Vince, that a lot higher than you as well, is TCU and Texas Tech.
Yeah, I've got them 8 and 10.
Yeah. I think TCU, I think last year was a fluky year for TCU. I think they're not as good as each of the last 2 years were flukes for TCU. They were fluky in the positive way. 2022 played for the title.
Right.
And everything went right. And then they were fluky last year for as bad as they were. They were not that bad. And they had a lot of injuries and just a lot of things going on. I actually like TCU this year, Vince. I think they've got some athleticism. They've got some speed. You know, they've got some good players coming back on defense. They should be a lot better on defense anyway, at least. I think their offensive line is going to get things figured out a little bit. I just like TCU, and also I think TCU's schedule sets up relatively well in their league. They got to play at Utah. The rest of their road games in the league are at Baylor, at Cincinnati. They get Oklahoma State at home. They get Arizona at home. They get Texas Tech at home. They get Houston at home. They get UCF at home. They got a really favorable schedule, in my opinion, Vince. They don't have to play Kansas or Kansas State this year. And so
they play Kansas this year.
They do?
They're at Kansas.
But it's on a neutral field.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's on a neutral field. So I actually missed that one.
Gotcha.
They don't play K-State. They get Oklahoma State at home. The only really tough road game they have is at Utah in conference. Now, because they could go lose by 50 at SMU and it doesn't matter because it's not a conference game.
True.
This is a conference prediction. So it's going to be interesting. And then Texas Tech, I really like what they're doing down there. I really do. They got some guys coming back, and their schedule, I think, also sets up pretty nicely with TCU or Texas Tech, Vince, looking at their schedule. I kind of look at them and they've got Arizona State at home, Cincinnati at home, Baylor at home, Colorado at home, West Virginia at home, right? So that's 5 wins that they have there. And then they also have at Arizona, at TCU, at Iowa State, at Oklahoma State. That's the hard part. And I don't think they win any of those. But I've said before, if you're just kind of an okay team, what do I always say? Get the teams that you're not going to beat anyway on the road, and get the teams that you can beat at home. And Texas Tech has the most great example of that. I don't think they're beating Oklahoma State wherever they play. I don't think they're beating, Iowa State this year, in my opinion. I don't know that they can beat Arizona this year wherever they played. So they get all those teams on the road, and then they get the team. I think they can beat Arizona State. They can beat Cincinnati. They can beat Baylor. They can beat Colorado. They can beat West Virginia. They get them all at home. And so I think the schedule is a big reason I have Texas Tech where I have them. It's more so than I like what they're doing. I do like what they're doing, but talent-wise, I'd say probably closer to 10th in the league.
Yeah.
But I think the schedule sets up nicely, and they battle, man. Like, that's what I like. They almost beat Oregon last year at home. And so I really like what Texas Tech is doing, and they got a lot coming back. So they're a team that I had up there higher too as well. Anybody else, Vince, that you wanted to talk about that you and I have a big difference of opinion on? I know that you have West Virginia, I believe, a lot higher than I do as well. I
have them 7, you have them 10. So, I mean, they're still kind of middle of the pack.
I thought last year was a bit of an anomaly season for them.
And that's fair. And, their coach was on the hot seat last year, going into last year, and then they had that good season and went 9-4. And so now it's going to be, okay, the seat's not quite as hot, but can you replicate what you did, last year? And talking about Neil Brown, obviously, and he's been there for 5. He took over in 2019. So, he had to navigate COVID and all that other stuff, and it probably extended his tenure because of that. Not a lot of guys got fired because of what happened during COVID. And so, if they didn't have that 9-4 season last year, they would have a first-year head coach right now. So, how does he operate under that umbrella? I think is going to be very interesting. I think that his schedule isn't the easiest on the planet. They get Penn State at home to open it up. Obviously, they lost pretty badly in the opener last year. They were 0-1 going into the season, and then they kind of righted the ship and got 4 straight wins. Well, this year, those 4 games are Albany at home, at Pittsburgh, and then Kansas at home. If you're going to get Kansas, get him at home. And, will Jalen Daniels be injured by then? That's the big question, right? If he's healthy, I think Kansas wins that game. If he's not healthy, I think West Virginia's got a shot at winning that game, right? And then you got to go to Oklahoma State. I don't think they would have beaten Oklahoma State regardless. So to your point, get that one on the road. That's fine. Go take that butt whooping on the road. And then they're hosting Iowa State and they host Kansas State. You like Kansas State a lot. I get that. I don't think they're going to win that game regardless of where it is either. It happens to be at home. So that's kind of a tough break. But then they go to at Arizona. I think they've got a shot at, depending on how the season goes at that point, right? How badly did they lose to Penn State and what happened against Kansas and Oklahoma State, I think goes a long way to what happens when they go on the road to Arizona.
It's fair.
You know what I mean? Like, if they can scratch out one of those wins, I think they got a shot at Arizona.
And here's the interesting part about all this, Vince, with West Virginia and just the league as a whole, is when things are close, like they are with a lot of teams.
Yeah.
Like even some teams like Colorado, we have both have 12th. I mean, look, Colorado has one of the best, most athletic teams in the league at certain spots, and it's like, could they be better? But but BYU's got a lot coming back. I think they could jump up. Houston's going to be much better coached this year, but they're going through a transition, moving to a different system. There's all types of things to look at, Vince. And the thing is, like, when things are close, what tends to happen is one of two things. One is the home teams hold serve.
Sure.
Because, or B, there's a lot more home upsets. And that could shake things up a lot. That's what makes this a really challenging thing to determine this league, Vince. It really does.
Like I said, I could make a case for a lot of teams to beat a lot of other teams. You know what I mean? And depending on how the season starts to shake out and where some of those wins come from will also determine which games get won and lost as you move forward. And so, it's going to be interesting.
Here's my wild card.
Okay.
Here's my big wild card team. UCF.
Okay.
Now, with Gus Malzahn, he's kind of like the Lincoln Riley of the Big 12. You never know what you're going to get from year to year from Gus, right?
Fair.
They're going to have one of the most athletic teams in the league, but they got KJ Jefferson to transfer in a quarterback. The Plumlee kid they had last year was literally an athlete playing quarterback. He was not a quarterback, in my opinion, Vince. Like, even for Gus Malzahn, I don't think he was a quarterback. I mean, he was a kid that should have been playing receiver or something else. I think it's John Reese Plumlee is how you say his name. Yeah. Super athletic kid, not a quarterback. And I felt that they made, not that they made a mistake, because I don't know what else they had, but he just wasn't a quarterback. And there were several games last year that they lost games late where, if he could have played better or the quarterbacks could have made more plays, they'd have won. I mean, they lost to Baylor by a point. They lost at Oklahoma by 2 points. They lost to Texas Tech by a point. And I could be wrong on this. I'm actually going to look it up, but I thought the UCF West Virginia game was close for a while. Yes, I am correct. It was UCF Kansas or West Virginia outscored them by 10 in the fourth quarter. And that's what kind of broke the game open. But for a while there was close, and the quarterback just couldn't make plays. He threw 3 interceptions. John Reese Plumlee 3 interceptions. And so UCF was down 21-24. They were down by 3 at halftime, 3 at the end of the third quarter. And then they had a 27-yard drive that came off of a interception, another 9-yard scoring drive in the fourth quarter off of a turnover, and that's what broke the game open. But with KJ Jefferson, who I like a lot at Arkansas, if he can stay healthy, again, this is kind of the reason I didn't rank them higher is because with KJ, it's very similar to Jalen Daniels. KJ has not been able to stay healthy consistently in his career. But if KJ Jefferson can stay healthy, don't sleep on UCF making some noise in this league, maybe even winning it. He's that good. I don't know how well he fits Gus Malzahn's offense. That's my only hang up.
Okay.
Because KJ can run, but KJ's not a runner. He's not Nick Marshall.
Right.
You know what I mean? He's not Cam Newton. He can do some of those things, but not full time. So I really like KJ Jefferson if he can stay healthy in that talent they have at UCF. I think quarterback was a big problem for them last year. They just had an athlete playing quarterback.
Yeah.
He wasn't really a quarterback.
Yeah, which you can win games with.
KJ's is a quarterback who is a good athlete. He's a quarterback. John Reese Plumlee was not a quarterback. And so that's why they're my sleeper team. I'm not ready to go with them yet, Vince. You and I both have them 9th.
Yeah.
But if I'm looking at a team, like what team, and that could, we always get asked, who's your surprise pick? That right there is my surprise team.
Okay.
That's that team that I think has enough talent coming back and portal additions that they could be that sleeper team that takes off and surprises some people. So that's mine. Do you have anybody like that, Vince, that you're like someone from the bottom half of your league prediction that you think could kind of take off? If Colorado didn't have so many,
they've got talent. It's just I don't know that they know.
I just don't like the character of that football team.
Right, exactly. And the fact that they just keep turning it over every year, it's just not good for building any kind of attitude or foundation or anything like that. And in college, I think that's uber important. I mean, this isn't the NFL. It's different, and so you cannot in college turn over your roster that way. You just can't. And I think Coach Prime's going to figure that out if he hasn't already. That's not a recipe for success per se. You can do that when you first come in. I get that part. It's kind of a changing of the guard, that kind of a deal. But then you made all kinds of promises to all those guys that came in, and then now half of them are gone again. You know what I mean? And so I don't know that instills the trust in the guys that are even still there. And then word of mouth and people talk, man, and you think you're going to get another influx of guys in. I just, that's just not the way to build a program, in my opinion. So I have a hard time getting on board with what Colorado's up to.
I agree. So, Vince, the other parts of what we do is teams on the rise.
Yes.
Who is your pick for now? Teams on the rise includes this year, teams that are ascending, but just in general, this year and beyond, teams that are ascending.
Sure.
In the Big 12.
Well, I had Kansas written down for this category, and I'm a big fan of Jalen Daniels. Obviously, I've made that pretty clear because I picked him as my player of the year, and that's one of the categories that we pick as well. I like what Lance Leopold has been doing at Kansas. I think he is getting talent there. I think he's doing a lot of the right things there. He just needs he needs his dynamic trigger man to be healthy. That's the biggest thing. If he's healthy, I think this Kansas team could compete for the championship. Yeah. I really do. I think their schedule is one that will allow that to happen. And again, if Daniels is healthy, that's the biggest question mark for Kansas right now. Can they keep him healthy? If they can keep him healthy, I love their schedule. I think their schedule sets up very, very nicely with a healthy quarterback. Now, if he's not healthy, throw it out the window, right? And then your prediction becomes true, and that's when they end up in the middle of the pack.
But again, you and I don't disagree a lot on Kansas.
Right.
We don't. I simply added a caveat in there that I just don't think the kid's going to.
And I get it. Oh, I totally get it.
That's where I'm coming from.
But if he's healthy, I think you and I are on the same page that this team could be right at the top. They could be right near the top and competing when it comes down to the last couple of games of the season. So they're my team on the rise just because, they've made some noise over the past couple of years, but they haven't obviously won the conference. They're not a perennial conference contender. And so that's why I say that they're on the rise, because I believe that if they can do that again this year, and then they reload in the with recruiting and everything, and I think they can maintain kind of the top third of the Big 12, and they can kind of stay in that conversation. So I really like Lance Leopold. I
agree. He's a heck of a coach.
Yeah.
He's a heck of a football coach.
Right.
I think Kansas State is as well.
Yeah.
I think Kansas State's got a heck of a football coach as well. I think Chris Kleiman's an excellent football coach. I just think they have more talent, and they can win more without – if Avery Davis goes down, I think they're in a better position to win than Kansas is.
Okay.
Now, part of that is because Chris Kleiman inherited a much better situation from Bill Snyder than what Lance Leopold inherited, right? So, that's kind of part of the conversation as well. But,
sure.
I think K-State's my team on the rise. So we're both in the same state. You look at Kansas State last year, Vince, and they went 9-4, and their losses were a 3-point road loss to Missouri, where I think the kid hit like a 60-yard field goal to win it.
Oh, is that the one?
Game.
Yeah, that kid's local, by the way.
Yeah. They lost at Oklahoma State by 8. They lost at Texas by 3. And their other loss was a home loss to Iowa State by 7. Now, you can say, well, what about their wins? Their 9 wins were by 45, 29, 13, 17, 38, 41, 34, and 4. Their 4-point win was at Kansas. And then they won their bowl game by 9. So they were a lot closer to being a 10-11 win team than they were to being, because sometimes people say, man, we were just like Brian Kelly used to drive me nuts. Or what was it, 2015 season? You remember that? And they kept talking like we were a play here and a play there away from, being undefeated. And I'm like, this is why you'll never win, because you were also a play away from losing to Virginia.
Right.
You were one more onside kick away from losing to Georgia Tech. You know what I mean? Like you almost lost to Temple. You had to throw a late last-minute touchdown against Temple to win that game. You almost lost to flipping BC that year. Like, bro, you were a lot closer to being 7-6 than you were 13-0. But Kansas, not the case. Like they won big or lost close. That was for Kansas State. That's who they were.
Yeah.
And I love Avery Johnson. You remember, Vince? I wanted Notre Dame to go get him in the 2023 class. Once you thought you weren't going to get Dante Moore, he didn't want to flip. They tried. Trust me, dude. They tried hard to flip Avery Johnson. Couldn't get him to flip. And it worked. It's worked out well for K-State. And so I really like that football team. And they're going to be fast. And they don't need Dylan Edwards to be a running back every down. They can do it because they've got J.R. Giddens. They can put him in the running back at times. They can put him in the slot. They can have him return kicks. And their defense is going to be pretty good as well. So I just think K-State's in a much better situation. They're a team I have on the rise.
Cool.
Iowa State, you could say, is going to be on the rise for the season, but Iowa State's always going to be like this. So they're not a team that I can look at. But I'm telling you, this is a big year for Texas Tech. Because if they're the team I think they're going to be, then they are going to be a team that's going to be one you want to look out for in the Big 12. Is not a team that's going to win it, but a team that's always going to be, man, I do not want to play down in Lubbock. Because they got a good roster, they got athletes, they're coached well, they play hard. They're never going to win the league, but they're always going to impact the league. They're always going to have those couple wins that this is why you finished third. Why'd you finish third instead of first or second? Well, flipping, got beat by Texas Tech, in week 5. And, and at home, so they're gonna be that. That's kind of what I think they're gonna be. So they're another team that I have on the rise. What about the overrated teams or the teams that are descending, in your opinion?
Well, it
can be either or.
I went the overrated route a little bit, but it's tough because they're not really overrated when it comes to where people are projecting them within the conference. I just think they're overrated because they get so much stinking attention, and they do have a lot of athletes. And I kind of went down the Colorado road already, and so I don't want to rehash everything that I just said, but they're the team that I picked from the overrated category because they just get so much attention. But I think people that actually know football are putting them middle to lower half of the Big 12 as far as where they're going to finish. And so that doesn't really make them overrated. You know what I mean? From a football standpoint.
Looking at the magazines, I think they all had them in the bottom half.
They did.
This year, right?
100% they did. And I would have done that anyway, but that's where they had them as well. Whereas I think it was probably different in the Pac-12 last year going into it. I think there was a lot of excitement about Colorado, and I think that has been tempered. But I still think that they're overrated. They're going to implode at some point this season, and it won't.
Well, that's the problem, Vince, is that the way that Coach Sanders has built that team, I don't think they're in it for the struggle.
Right?
You know
exactly.
I mean?
Exactly.
And when you look at how they're like, you're already hearing it of the dissension, and he's making them go to his kids' parties, and if they don't, now I don't know how true that stuff is, but it's being spread. So like, there's some level of
there has to be at least a kernel of truth there.
There's clearly not a unified situation there, and the way that their schedule is, they could start off 0-2. They play North Dakota State and at Nebraska in the first two games. Like, dude, that if they go through a period of losing, they're gonna just fall apart.
Oh, 100%.
That's my fear.
100%.
That's my fear. To your point, the two magazines, Lindy's and Athlon, both have Colorado 11th. You and I both have them 12th, so it's all within the same thing. The team that I think is kind of descending, I don't know that I'd call them overrated. I think I'll say it. I think they're overrated. Is Arizona.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, they weren't even a top 10 team last year, right? They shouldn't have been. They were a 10-3 team, good team, but not a top 10 team. Should not have been ranked ahead of Notre Dame, for example. I still don't get that one, how they were ranked ahead of Notre Dame. I'm just like, why? Because they didn't lose as bad to Washington as everybody else lost to Washington. Like, they got beat by USC, who Notre Dame destroyed.
Right.
So I never understood that. They beat Stanford by a point. Notre Dame destroyed Stanford. So like, literally you have three common opponents with Arizona last year. Stanford, they beat by 1 point at Stanford. USC, they lost to by 2 points at USC, and then they beat Oregon State by 3. Notre Dame beat those teams by, 33, 28, and 32. And yet Arizona, with the same exact record as Notre Dame, finished ranked higher than Notre Dame. Based on what wins, I don't know.
Right.
Their wins were over Northern Arizona, UTEP, Stanford, Washington State, Oregon State, UCLA, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona State. And Oklahoma in a bowl game? Like, what wins make you think they were better? But they ranked ahead of Notre Dame last year. Shouldn't have. They were overrated last year. They're overrated this year, especially now they've lost their head coach. They lost their top running back. They lost half their starting offensive line left. I think most of their defensive line left to go to Washington. Their one offensive lineman they had, Jordan Morgan, got drafted, I think, in the first round, maybe early second round this past draft. They were a one-hit wonder, in my opinion. They were a one-hit wonder. So I look at it and I'm not on the Arizona bandwagon. I think they're a very overrated program. Because like your point about Colorado, I don't think you can. No one's overrating Colorado,
right?
And as far as the storylines, they're there because people care. People pay attention to that crap. It's a soap opera.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what ESPN is. It's a soap opera for men, essentially, is what it is.
That's great.
So it's and that's kind of what Colorado gives you.
Yes.
So I just I'm not an Arizona guy. And again, it's all because I don't think Noah Fafiti is what people make him out to be. Now we'll find, I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, then if I'm wrong about him, I'm going to be wrong about this.
Sure.
So it makes sense. Those two things go hand in hand. If he's better than I think he is, then they're going to be a good football team and a top 4 to 5 team in the league. Let me rephrase that. Top 2 to 3 team in the league. If I'm wrong on him. If I'm right on him, then they're going to be 6 through 9. Because I have him 6, but I could see them going down even further. If I'm right about Arizona, I may even have him too high at 6. But that's kind of where I'm at. So that's the team that I think is the most overrated team in that league right now. Kansas, I don't think is overrated because, again, my prediction is based on their quarterback getting hurt.
Right, and that does nothing to do with being overrated.
You can't make most people. It's unfair to make a prediction based off thinking someone's going to get hurt. So
it is what it is. So coaches on the hot seat. This is an interesting one because a lot of the teams that are picked to be kind of lower half of the conference are fairly new coaches. Either first or second year or brand new. That kind of a thing. And so you can't really put a coach on a hot seat after being there for a year. That's not. I mean, maybe schools do that, but that's not really fair.
I will have a guy on the hot seat after 1 year.
Okay.
Yeah, who's going into his second year. We'll get to that. But usually you don't.
Fair enough.
Usually you don't. It has to be an extenuating circumstance.
Okay. Fair enough. I'll lead off. My coach on the hot. I have 2, but really it's 1. My second one was more he's still a great fit at the school, and so I don't know that the wins and losses are as important, if that makes sense. And I'll say that one first. So I had was it Kalami Sitake? Is that how you say his name?
Kalani Sitake.
At BYU. I think he's a really good fit from a culture standpoint and all of those different things at BYU. And so I'm guessing the leash is probably a little bit longer for him than it would be maybe for some other coaches at other schools under the same wins and losses circumstances. So I put him on here. I just don't know how accurate it is from a BYU standpoint. Does that make sense?
Yes. And like my thing is he's not on mine unless they are bad.
Okay.
And there's a couple reasons why. Number one is he had some really good years going into last year.
Right.
They weren't terrible. I mean, they were 5-7 last year. They weren't good, but they weren't awful. And they had some competitive losses. Some of their losses, let's be honest, were bad losses, but they had a couple that were competitive. They lost in double overtime to Oklahoma State, lost by a touchdown against Oklahoma. The rest of them lost by 11 at Kansas. The rest of them were blowouts, but it's the fact that he's an alum.
Yeah.
Is part of it for me. They are making the transition to a Power 5 school for the first time, and they've never been a Power 5 team.
Yep,
they've been in a league before, but that was the Mountain West and the WAC. They were never in a Power 5, and he's 3 years removed from a 10-3 season, and 4 years removed from an 11-1 season where they finished 11th in the polls. Now, if they're worse than 5-7, then he may be on the hot seat next year.
Got you.
But he's not on it now unless they're like 2-10 in just a horrible football team. And it's so obvious he's in over his head at the Power 5 level. You got to move on from him.
Right.
That would be my thing is there. Cause he's now going into this is going to be his, let's see, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. This is his 10th year. No, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is his 9th year. Last year's losing record was only the second losing record he's had. And his previous one was all the way back in 2017. They won 7, 11, 10, 8 games prior to last year. So I think he'll get a little bit of a grace period because he's an alum.
Yep.
And honestly, kind of because he should, because they are making that transition to the Power 5.
I get that. The one I had on there with really no hesitation whatsoever was Dave Aranda at Baylor.
Yeah, he's definitely on there.
I mean, that was a fairly easy one for me. I mean, they were 3-9 last year. I mean, that's just not good. He's under 500 at Baylor. I think he's like 23-25. That's just not getting it done.
Which is not good when you consider he had a 12-2 season where they went to the Sugar Bowl and won the Sugar Bowl.
Okay, there you go.
His second year, they went 12-2 and beat Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl and won the Big 12 title. And he still has a losing record.
Right.
As a coach.
Right.
That's
just not good. Not good. And the magazine I'm looking at right now, they're picked 12th in the league. Where did I have them? I have them 11th. I think you're probably in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
With yours as well.
I have them 14th.
You have them 14th, so even worse than I do. So this may be the swan song here for Dave Aranda at Baylor, and so that's why he was my pick.
Well, and they didn't do him any favors. They've got to play at Utah, at Colorado, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech, at West Virginia, at Houston. So they get Kansas and Oklahoma State at home and TCU at home, meaning it's that thing I talk about, right? Like, so you want to get the teams you can beat at home, or at home, and then the teams you can't beat on the road. Well, this year they got both. Because they got to play at Utah and at Houston, at Iowa State, at West Virginia, but then they also get the best teams in the schedule they get at home, other best teams to get at home. That's a brutal schedule. It's a really tough schedule. And it's going to be tough for him to survive that, in my opinion, because of they're just bad. And like last year, Vince, I mean, they were 3-9 last year. They lost by 11 points to Texas State.
Yikes.
They had a close loss against Utah at home. But then they lost by 32 to Texas, 25 at home to Texas Tech, 12 points at home to Iowa State. They lost in overtime at home to Houston, who fired their coach at the end of the year. They lost by 34 at Kansas State. They lost by 25 at TCU, and then they lost at home by 3 points to West Virginia. Like they literally did not win they did not win a single league game at home last year. They only won one game at home.
Their 2 Power 4 conference wins were by a total of 4 points.
Yes, a point at UCF and 3 points at Cincinnati. Yeah. And then their other win was over Long Island.
Right.
Right.
I wasn't even sure who LIU was.
Yeah, that's Long Island.
Okay.
Long Island University. Nobody knows who they are. So you're fine. Nobody else knows who they are.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's not good. And they got to play Air Force at home this year. Like, is it even a given they're going to beat Air Force?
No.
Like that.
Because it's Air Force, as well as I do, it's a service academy, obviously. But they're going to run a gimmicky offense. I say gimmicky, but you know what I mean. It's triple option. It's not something you see on a regular basis. So that means you actually have to be coached up, and you have to be ready to go, and you have to be planned out for it. I don't know that that's a given. I really don't. I don't think that's a given win. Their only given win on their schedule is, the way I see it, is Tarleton, wherever the heck that is.
They're actually a really good FCS team. They're a top 25 FCS team.
Okay.
But Tarleton State. Yeah. It's tough, man. It's a tough schedule. They did not help Dave Aranda out at all. Like, there's a couple coaches this year that are on the hot seat that it's like almost like their schools were like, okay, we want to get rid of him, but we don't have enough cause yet. So let's give him like a brutal schedule and make sure that he can't.
Make sure that he's out.
Yeah. And that's Billy Napier's that way. And
my gosh,
and also
Billy Napier.
Yeah.
You want to feel sorry for a guy when it comes to a schedule.
I don't feel sorry for Billy Napier.
Well, I when it comes to a schedule, I do. Yes. But I get what you're saying.
He brought that on himself. But and then what is? I mean, they're going to have to go to a bowl game for him to save his job.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Against that schedule. Yeah.
You can't be in year 5 at a Power 5 school and have one winning record.
Right. Even as successful as it was.
Yeah.
It's surrounded.
Charlie Weiss got fired after 5 years, and he only had 2 losing seasons. Matter of fact, no, I'm sorry. Charlie only had one losing season, and he got fired after 5 years, right? Because they went 6-6 last year, and then 7-6 the year before, right? Because they beat Hawaii in a bowl game.
So, yeah.
Because in 2008, they beat Hawaii in a bowl game at the end of the year. They couldn't have gotten a bowl game if they had a losing record, so they were at least 7-6. And he got fired after 5 years, and he had 2 really good seasons.
Yeah, his first
at Notre Dame. Dave Aranda's had 1, and they've been bad every other year. So 2-7 and 3-9 in his other years there. Oof. So yes, It's not good. It's not good. And look, 20 years ago, maybe Baylor, hey, you're a good guy. We like you. He's a well-liked guy, well-respected.
And with their issues that they've had in the past, like that goes a long way.
But man, dude, this is a team that Matt Rule came in here and turned this thing around pretty quick. I mean, your last 2 head coaches won.
Yeah.
And you're not winning. And the only winning you did was with a roster that the previous guy recruited. Now, that's part of the issue with Dave Aranda, too, is he had about a good 2 years to win at Baylor with Matt Rule's guys. And then after that was going to be a problem because Matt Rule didn't really recruit his last year there very well.
He had his eyes to the NFL.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But this is going to be now your 3rd year to rebuild the roster. And let's see if you can do it or not. So they're going to have to turn it around for him to have a shot. But the other guy that I have on the hot seat too, Vince, is a guy that's only in year 2 at a school, and that's Scott Satterfield at Cincinnati.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's
a train wreck at Cincinnati.
It is a train wreck. He's part of the train wreck. to be honest with you.
Coming from what they were when he took over. Now, I realize they had to transition to the Big 12. I get that. That's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Like, okay, fine. But even with that said, this was a team that was in the college football playoff when he took over.
2 years before.
2 years before. Okay.
Yeah, and they went 9-4 the year before he took over.
Yeah. A quality team, quality program.
9-4 season, and they lost to his Louisville team. That 9-4 Cincinnati team lost by a touchdown at Arkansas, lost by 4 points at UCF, 3 points against Tulane, and then lost to Satterfield's Louisville team. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I don't think Satterfield coached in that bowl game.
He probably had already taken the job at Cincinnati, right?
Yeah, let me go look at that actually real quick and see if he did take that or not, because it'll show up in here. Yeah, he did not coach in the bowl game. So he takes over. They go 3-9. Say, oh yeah, well look, they're transitioning to a Power 5. Okay, cool. How does that justify losing to Miami of Ohio at home? How does that justify losing by 20 at home to Iowa State? How does that justify losing to a 3-9 Baylor team at home? They were bad. They were bad. And he's just not likable. I just don't like Scott Satterfield. And that's sad. But he soured me because I love what he did at App State, but he just became just incessantly whining at Louisville about how woe is me. I'm like, bro, you took this job. You left a great situation to go take this job. Stop whining about it. And he goes to Cincinnati, and in his defense, a lot of the talent that Luke Fickell won with was brought in by Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden. And now you get there in 23, and you're now a couple years removed from a lot of the talent that Freeman had brought in, because Freeman left in 2020. So it's like, okay, I get it. But, man, they were just not good. And when you're not likable, and then you look at their schedule this year, Vince, and it's like, I don't know, their schedule's not the best for them either. They've got to play Pitt. They got to play at Miami of Ohio, at Texas Tech, at UCF, at Colorado, at Iowa State, at Kansas State. Then their home games, they get Houston at home, who they beat last year, Pitt at home, who they beat last year, Arizona State at home, West Virginia at home, TCU at home. So there's some home games they got a shot of losing as well. So if he has another 3-9, 4-8 season, I could see if there's the right guy out there for them,
right,
I can see them being like, hey, we can't afford to fall to the bottom of this league.
Right. And
because we'll never climb our way out.
Exactly.
We'll never be able to climb our way out. We've got to make a move now before it's too late. I could certainly see something like that. Right. Certainly could see something like that. So I do also have Scott Satterfield on my hot seat. And it's not unprecedented. It doesn't happen often, but we've seen guys get fired after a couple of years if it's bad enough.
Fair enough.
If it's bad enough. So that's where I'm at for the league, Vince.
Cool. Now, our last part is the player of the year, and I already kind of gave mine away in Jaden Daniels.
I kind of gave yours
away.
I apologize, but it was appropriate to the conversation
100%.
that we were having.
I'm cool with it. I will forgive you for your transgression in this regard. I will say that the reason I chose Jaden Daniels is because when I think of MVP, most valuable player, he is the most valuable player for Kansas. And if he's healthy all season long, I think Kansas can be really good, in the league. And so that's why he's the MVP. He's the most valuable to his situation. And therefore, that's why I have him as my player.
But I think he's also the most I'll say this, Vince. If he's healthy for 13 games, meaning regular season plus the conference title game,
yep,
I don't disagree with your pick. I mean, he is an outstanding football player when he's healthy.
Yeah.
But like I said, the problem is he just hasn't been able to get healthy.
And I get that.
That's the problem with Jalen Daniels is he just doesn't stay healthy now.
Right.
He's a fun guy to watch though when he's healthy.
He is. Yes,
he is a fun guy to watch.
Right.
Look, I'm because I still think Oklahoma State's going to be good again. It's hard for me not to go with Ollie Gordon, who was the nation's leading rusher.
The running back, yeah.
They're going to have some talent around him. I could see Avery Johnson maybe jumping into this conversation as a dynamic. I mean, look, here's the thing about the Big 12, Vince. There's a lot of dynamic quarterbacks and really talented quarterbacks in this league, right? Like Cameron Rising's not dynamic, but he's a veteran guy that's won a lot of games. You've got Jalen Daniels, you've got Avery Johnson. You've got Noah Fafiti. If people are right about, and again, I don't think he sucks. I just don't think he's as like
elite
top
as,
10 quarterback like people are. He's a good college quarterback. That's kind of it,
Right.
He's still that. You've got Garrett Green at West Virginia. You've got KJ Henderson at UCF. You got Shador Sanders at Colorado. And so I'm like, man, dude, like there's actually some good quarterbacks in this league, So I think you could see a quarterback maybe jump into that conversation, but I like the two Kansas quarterbacks, the two quarterbacks in the state of Kansas. If Jalen Daniels is healthy, I could see that. If Avery Johnson is what I think he's going to be, I think he could be that in that conversation as far as those two guys challenging Ollie Gordon for the player of the year. But I'm going to go with the reigning player. I think Ollie Gordon was the player of the year in the league last year.
Well, he won the Doak Walker Award, right? So, I mean, it's probably
let me just check. I
bet.
could be wrong on that. Let me see it. 2023 Big 12 Player of the Year. I thought it was Ollie Gordon, but maybe they gave it to a Texas guy. Yeah, it was Ollie Gordon. Was the offensive player of the year last year. So I'm gonna keep him there until somebody gives me a reason to have somebody else there. Oh, I've also thought about Rocco Becht, also, who was a freshman of the year last year at Iowa State. So there's some good quarterback playing, like not great like future first round picks, but there's good quarterbacks in this league, man, which is also going to make it to where at the end of the day, Vince, here's the thing about the Big 12. Number one, we did not say we both only have one team from this league going to the college football playoff?
I think so.
Yeah.
Like so only one team from the Big 12.
Only
right?
one team from that league is going to be in the playoff, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yes.
I just don't see a second team being a 1 to 2 loss team and getting in, right?
Completely agree. I think they're going to beat up on each other.
Yes. And I think whoever wins that league is going to get beat in the quarterfinals by whoever they play that's the 5 seed. Having said that, it's not a great league from the standpoint of, boy, there's these great teams at the top. This might be the most fun conference to watch this year.
Bingo.
Because literally, I'm looking at the top 13 teams in the league. So Arizona State, Houston, and Cincinnati to me are all going to struggle. I think Baylor might struggle. But Baylor's got some players, though, man, at some spots. They have some players. But the top 13 teams on any given Saturday can beat anybody else in the league, in my opinion, for the most part, if they play to their potential and are coached well. There's going to be some crazy upsets. I think this league is going to eat itself more than any other league. It's going to be a fun.
It's going to be entertaining. Yeah, it's going to be entertaining because I think any team can. Well, not any team. Most teams could beat most teams any Saturday, right? Depending on where it's being held and what the situation is. The injury situation, as you have pointed out. But no, I think I'm hoping also that we get an opportunity to see more Big 12 games too. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of opportunity where we don't get to see a lot of Big 12 games. And so I'm hoping now that the conference is a little bit more widespread, we get to see a few more of these games. Because a lot of these teams we don't get a chance to see because they're former Pac-12 and, Pac-12 after dark and, all of those different things. But
that's why DVR or whatever version you have of it is such a beautiful thing. Because you got my Fubo membership, right, Vince?
Yep.
And I'll be saving a lot of those games this year.
Yes,
so I don't know if you know this, but Fubo got rid of their 1,000-hour limit.
Oh, did they really?
Now that you can only keep something in there for like 30 days or something like that. After 30 days, it goes away. But they got rid of the 1,000-hour limit, so you can take as many games as you want.
Okay, so they went. Okay, interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
gotcha.
You just can't keep stuff as long. So
that makes sense.
Yeah,
that's fine. If you're not going to watch it in 30 days, you didn't really want to watch it in the first place.
Bingo.
Yeah, I look at it.
Bingo.
So end of the day,
except if you're talking about Angela and her Christmas movies,
no comment.
Because she will, especially like that when they do that Christmas in July on Hallmark and stuff, she will literally record every flipping movie, including a bunch she's already watched already.
It's hilarious.
And it takes her the whole fall to watch all those.
And then the new ones start coming out, so then you're good.
It's one way of putting it.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for our Big 12 preview, everybody. And that's also going to put a bow on our Power 4 conference preview. If you missed any of them and you want to check them out, they are on the podcast. And I believe that, well, of course, they're also on the YouTube channel as well. You just got to go back and hunt for them a little bit, but they're all there. They've all been done in the last about month and a half. So go check them out. And we'll put this up also on the CFB Nation podcast channel, so you can check it out there as well. And This is going to be a fun conference to watch, Brian.
It is. Sure. It is. We will have our playoff predictions soon. Vince, you and I will do that. It'll either be early next week before you go back to work, or we may do it on a weekend. We haven't decided yet when that's going to be.
Cool.
But we're going to have our college football playoff predictions as well. We'll pick our 12 playoff teams, and then we will predict how the playoff. We'll pick seeding. We'll pick how who's going to win, and we'll pick our Final Four teams, our championship team, and
that's complicated with the 12-teamer, man. All right.
Yep.
Give me some notice.
I'm giving you a heads up, Vince.
This is the notice, right?
This is the notice.
Okay.
It ain't tomorrow, so you got time.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
Good. And you don't have to stick to predictions that you've made from the league if you change your mind on stuff as well.
Gotcha. No, it's gonna be fun either way. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us on yet another day of Irish Breakdown Podcast. Really appreciate it. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Jump on the boards at irishbreakdown.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Tomorrow is, what's the day again tomorrow? What day of the week is it?
Friday, August 9th, baby. So
Friday.
You know what that means.
Boom! It's the Friday free-for-all mailbag, folks. So make sure you tune in. We're going to have a lot of fun, and the show's driven by you. It's only as good as the questions that you put in. So make sure you hang out with us tomorrow at 1 o'clock. It's my last Friday free-for-all mailbag for a little while. So let's make it a good one, folks. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Come on, you, man. Give up your job. Supporting your kids is overrated, man.
Yeah. They'll be gone at some point. Don't worry.
Yeah.
They'll all be gone. Leave me alone.
You're doing mailbags all the time.
Yeah. So thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. Really appreciate it. For Brian, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.